Today is Tuesday, August 6th. This is a regular meeting of the Los Angeles Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioner Soboroff,
Yeah.
Decker, Bonner, and Goldsmith are present, and we have a quorum.
Okay. Before we begin today, I think it's extremely important to take a moment of silence, not only for one of our own, Officer Diaz, whose service will be on, another service will be on Monday, but also to so many victims of this senseless shootings in Dayton, El Paso, up at the Garlic Festival, and hundreds. You know, I saw today that one of the biggest back-to-school sellers is bulletproof backpacks for kids, being sold in some stores that also sell guns. Let's take a moment of silence. Okay, the election, item number one, election of officers, we're going to have when all five commissioners are here, which will be 2 weeks from today, August 20th. Mr. Tefank, is that correct?
That is correct, sir, August 20th.
Okay, let's go to item number two. Let's go to item number two. Item number two is consent agenda items.
When is the public comment today? Question.
When is a public comment?
Today, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be, well, do you have the agenda there?
Do I?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm asking you, when is the public
Yeah,
comment?
public comment is item number 5
Be
today.
at the end of the meeting, sir, after all the regular business.
Okay, on item number 2, on the consent agenda items, do we have any commissioner comments on items 2A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I? And J.
We only have one speaker on number 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D, excuse
Okay,
me.
so I'll move approval of E, F, G, H, I, and J. Second, all in favor? Aye. Okay, let's have the speaker on item number 2A.
That is Mr. Herman.
Okay. Can you hold the mic a little closer? It's hard for us to hear.
Sorry.
Thanks. Mr. Herman, is it the same speaker on A, B, C, and,
D, yes, sir.
okay, and those were the only ones, right?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Herman, you can do all 4, A, B, C, and D.
Public comment time, Mr. Philip, and you're discriminating against me again. I just want to do one at a time. Why do I have to do all of them?
Okay, we're on,
What number, dummy? 2A? Yeah. Well, since we're all registered to travel, lodging is only $267.63 according to the authority for the chief of police to attend the chief association known as LCPCA. That's a very interesting acronym because I use USA, which stands for Unite Stupid Ass to the 2019 Strategic Planning Workshop, which is SPW. And I confirm that on September 18th, according to BPC number 190206, am I on topic, Mr. T-Fag? Thank you. For Temecula. Temecula has a good wineries. I like to drink sometimes on the
Mr.
weekend.
President, he's off topic.
off topic.
This is regarding Temecula. And because the jackass recommends for the board action to stay on topic, I will approve of the asshole to continue
President, he's off
disruption
Off topic,
of the
let's go to
department's
2B now,
report.
Mr. You want to set the clock to 2 minutes again? We're on
Well,
2B now.
I got 41 seconds, dumbass. Look.
2B.
Oh, to be or not to be? Okay, to be. Today we're going to pay $76 for Mr. Moore's expenses on a traveling trip, but the gentleman makes $2 million a year. Why should we pay $76 when it should be waived? Thank you, kids. You're right. We shouldn't give them this kind of money extra. Besides that, majority cities, chief associations, which I know a particular chief from Downey by the name of Mr. Dean, and he told me that the MCCA, which stands for Mighty Council Collectible Association of Chiefs, are having this International Association of Chief Police on the annual 126th Threat Management Unit. I'm sorry, it says Conference Expo. It's CE, not TMU. We know what the TMU does to people with that
Mr. President, he's
slap
off topic.
Off topic.
But in Chicago, back in the days in the Illinois time, we were segregated.
Mr. President, he's off
Let's
topic.
go to item number C, off topic on B.
But I didn't get
You're
to
on
talk
number
about
2C.
the
You
flight
can set the
expenses,
clock for
and
2
I didn't get
minutes,
to
please.
talk about the lodging for Mr. Chief Moore of over $1,000.
You're off topic on 2C, so go
We're on
ahead.
2C now? Am I on 2C, Mr. Sobroff? Can you help me on April 12th? On April 12th, DANAKATZ, as in cats, meow, said that relative to monetary donations in the amount of $35,000 not to exceed $35,280,000 from the Los Angeles Police Foundation to be used to pay off bribes to the LAPD.
Off topic.
Ban travel.
What's your second off topic? Okay, so we'll go to.
Washington,
did he have a
D.C.
comment on
National
D?
Police Week for the
Okay, we're on D
benefit-
now.
Oh, D for dummy. Oh, okay, dummy. Let's start all over again because Jack has taken away your
Okay, so we're
time.
off topic. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, because if you have a problem with Ms. Glassman's assessment on monetary donations, you need to call 213-489-4636 for the record. This reflects account number, budget number, or assessor number 2019-031. Off topic. Sorry, got you, fool. Regarding the Los Angeles hockey team to participate in Heroes Cup. Well, you know, the real heroes are the police officers who step up into the fight against crime. They should be fighting crime, not participating in hockey games, because those are the true heroes who defend public services. Yes, this tournament is held in Boston. Isn't that where that other bombing happened? Just like those shootings recently in Kilroy? You know, I'm not a terrorist like the city of Los Angeles, but the police department has set forth under BPC number 19-0209 to accept the donations regarding this monetary $1,500 for the funding of a tournament. Don't we get better ways of spending money for tournament activities? You know, we should learn to give entrance fees, waive like the way the city waived my fees to participate in my
Off
threat man.
topic. Okay, we have a motion for approval of items 2A. Off
Seconds.
topic, please take a
How can
seat.
I be off topic? 22 seconds.
Last
sir.
warning, I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting.
How could you didn't give me a warning? You just told me I have 21
You can leave the
seconds.
meeting.
How the hell can you throw me out? I got 21 seconds, sir.
Mr. Herman, you can leave.
You didn't even give me a chance
It's
to go sit down.
motion for approval of items 2A, B, C, and D.
Is that the way you choose people, treat people?
Do we have a second? All those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 3. Mr. Herman, you can, he can leave the meeting, get your stuff and leave.
Mr. President, for the record, Mr. Herman continues to disrupt the meeting as you asked him to leave.
Let's start.
Continues to disrupt
Let's
the
start.
meeting by speaking out loud.
It's not worth being disrupted by him. Item number 3, item number 3A. Do we have any commissioner comments or questions on item number 3A? Okay. Start.
Again, Mr. President, for the record, Mr. Herman continues to disrupt the meeting.
Who's got, is Commander or Sergeant coming up?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay,
I didn't hear, I apologize.
yeah.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Ed Prokop, the Commanding Officer of Support Services Group, and with me is our donation subject matter expert, Sergeant Susan Mickles.
Morning.
This manual revision was a collaboration by many entities from within and outside the department, to include the Office of the City Attorney and the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy. The new directive provides clarifications on definitions and reporting procedures and sets clear parameters for what is considered a donation. In addition, specific department entities shall be consulted prior to requesting acceptance of a donation to ensure it can be supported, for instance, Facilities Management Division for structural issues to any facility, Motor Transport Division for any transportation equipment of our vehicle fleet, and Information Technology Group, obviously for any IT issues. Specific language was added to reaffirm that donations are not to be placed into use by the requesting command until approval of this body or the City Council. Commanding officers will fully identify the donor, reason for the donation, and identify if the donation was solicited or not on behalf of the command. The COs will describe the relationship with the donor and identify any possible conflicts of interest to be declared. If there is a conflict, the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy will provide guidance on how to proceed. Administrative Services Bureau tracks each of these donations, and as of 31 July of this year, we have processed 202 for an average of about 28 a month. Last year, Administrative Services Bureau processed 264. Is there any specific questions we can answer?
I only have a few questions. First of all, thank you for your work on this. Greatly appreciate it. It appears that the changes make sense. So thank you for that. I just want a few pieces of clarification. With respect to the provisions related to coming to the Board of Police Commissioners and Council if required first, whether that means that what we get will actually seek approval before the money is spent in all situations, and when does that go into effect? Because so frequently we get the donations after the expenditure has happened. So can you just clarify that provision for me?
That was always the practice and mandate by the organization. It's just this order specifically codified it. So we were obviously stressing that, and obviously the authority rests with this body or the City Council to ultimately approve it. So that word has been pushed out to all the subordinate commands, and they're well aware of it. And hopefully our compliance rate on that will be a lot higher.
And perhaps you want to get out that it'll be our expectation that we receive the request before the money is spent. I think it's very important that that start happening as soon as possible. Secondly, I had a question that is, I believe, within the scope of this, but I want to be sure that the donations, that there's an audit and oversight procedure, that the money that's being accepted is actually being used for the purpose that the donation was given. Can either one of you explain that procedure so that we can be assured that the donations are actually used for the intended purpose?
So I'll just say that the order does codify that Internal Audits and Inspections Division is charged with that very specific audit, and I'll follow up to ensure, see if we can get a projected schedule on that.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Commissioner Bonner?
Thank you. So I had a similar question about the after the fact review, as I noted on today's agenda. For example, we had the July 20th Dodger game, I think, and the travel back in May. I think some of those were two that were on the agenda. What would happen in a situation like that if we chose not to approve it?
Then the specific requesting entity would not receive the funding. Or
No,
would not
I'm
be-
saying, so somebody's incurred an expense and done something already in days past, and then the request comes to the commission for approval. What would happen in the event that somebody's already expended funds, and if the commission were not to approve the donation, what would happen in that event?
then that entity, that person, or that command would not be reimbursed.
Okay. On the first page there, there's the section about exceptions, which I think probably is more accurately should be referenced exemptions, since it lists a number of items that are exempt. And in regards to the informal meetings and gatherings, is that a new, I see this is all in italics here, but is this a new provision? And can you comment a little bit about, I understand if there's some differences or some questions that some of them are kicked to the chief of staff, it looks like, but how is one determine really the difference between an informal and a formal gathering or event?
Again, there is some latitude for the commanding officer to interpret this, but informal would be a community member just decides to drop off, a case of water or something during a CPAB meeting. That, from my understanding of this, would not be covered. And something more formal, such as a dedicated supervisors meeting every quarter held at a specific venue within the city, and there was a donor that gave $300, $400, $500 or 100 sandwiches, that then would be something that would be covered under this process.
But so it's a supervisor that's going to have, because those examples are kind of at the easier examples that you might think of. There may be some shades of gray in between, and is that a supervisor's determination then, just as to whether something is informal or formal?
It would be the commanding officer's decision.
And in terms of the, there's an exemption for informal gatherings. Could you have a situation where a single donor makes just unlimited donations for informal gatherings? Say somebody just over the last 10 years and just maybe into the future always gives $1,000 a week for some area office or something to have informal things. You're saying no, so explain that to me a little bit.
That would be formal, sir, because that it's an ongoing donation. Anything that's going to be monetary would be a donation. So it would be more of food that's perishable, like a box of donuts, where if someone showed up today and brought in donuts for the meeting, that's a perishable item. But anything that's going to be a continuous basis that we know and ahead of time that is going to be happening, that would be formal.
So again, I'm looking, so this says food and drink intended to be consumed by the department employees, volunteers, and guests during informal meetings or gatherings. So could someone drop off food or unlimited food or drink? And so I think you're reflecting it or suggesting there's another element of this definition that if it's a one-time or ad hoc donation of food or drink for an informal gathering, it's not a donation. But if someone has a practice at some point of doing that over time, where is it that in this document that I would know that multiple donations from a single source over some period, I don't know if it's 10 or 20 or 50 or what have you, but when does it then become a formal donation?
Go ahead, sir.
I think that would be covered. There have been 2 instances so far this calendar year where we have received donation requests to be accepted by this body, and it did not meet the criteria. But yet, Administrative Services Bureau still maintains and archives that paperwork, so I think that answer would be in that area, if that makes sense.
Well, I think what I'm looking for is to make sure that we have some controls that when you're talking about, you have relationships, different groups, provide different levels of support in different parts of the department and so on. And I think what I'm looking for is some assurance that there not be too cozy a relationship with any given donor who simply is always looked to as the person who comes by on Friday and drops X, Y, or Z off and for everybody to enjoy. And I'm understanding you to say that if that were to happen at some point, that's considered a formal gathering, but that's what it's a little bit unclear to me as to where's the control on that.
If it's an expected donation, and I know that someone's going to show up on a Friday night and bring pizzas to the officers working, then that would actually have to become a formal donation because we have an expectation that they're going to do that, or we have knowledge that they are doing it. In one case, as an example, Hollywood has a community member who likes to draw or paint and brings in about once a month or every 2 months a painting that they painted. And its value It's hard to put a dollar amount on it, but we know that she's going to do that, so then it's a donation now. It becomes formal.
Is that what you're describing? Is that spelled out in here somewhere? I've just missed it, or?
There is a specific verbiage for any reoccurring contracts, such as wireless devices, Wi-Fi, that kind of coverage.
No, well, so I'm just sticking with this other example where somebody is dropping, whether it's in this case a painting or every week bagels or what have you. I'm looking for something that tells us that at some point in time, there's a trip wire there that somebody says, oh no, after the third one, after the fifth one, after 3 in a month, whatever that is, how do we know that at some point it does actually become treated as a donation?
I think that's going to be incumbent upon the senior staff of the organization to ensure that each of the commanding officers and OICs are thoroughly read into what's expected and to look for those red flags, and I'm confident that'll occur.
How will that happen? In terms of, so we're talking about an issue that I perceive as potentially a somewhat of a gray area. How would that happen in terms of making sure that everybody gets the consistent advice and guidance as to how to handle this?
Physically, it would occur from each of the office chiefs. The assistant chief level has, direct reports with their subordinate commands, and that message would be carried by him or her, and subsequently forced down the chain of command at the bureau levels. I know the bureaus have weekly, if not daily, conversations with their COs.
Is that what you're describing? Is that something that necessarily follows the issuance of a special directive?
Something as
in other words,
sensitive
or
as-
does somebody need to actually push to initiate that to cause that to happen?
I mean, traditionally, but I'll defer that to the chief of police. But generally, yes, that's how specific word is explained.
Hi. Sorry, sir, this is also, hi, yeah, not the chief, Jeff Burt from, Risk Management Legal Affairs Group. This is going to be a topic, if approved by the Police Commission, at the next general staff meeting, which has all the captains and command staff above it to discuss this order specifically from my shop.
And in that event, if there are additional questions that come up, areas of that may or may not be clear to everyone in understanding it, does it go back through the process then again for some additional drafting or clarification or what I'm concerned about here and what I'm looking for is we're identifying a couple of areas where it does call for some discretion. And I think in any policy like this, you need that because you can't think of every scenario that may arise and so on. But at the same time, what you don't want unfettered discretion where someone can just basically, and regularly just interpret their way around or through the policy. So I'm saying when this goes out, and it's a little bit of a question about how special directives work also, because when it goes out, you do that briefing, and then in every one, you see that the same question's coming up, or that there's 3 or 4 things that we didn't think of, somebody else didn't think of, and you're getting asked. Question is, what's the department's practice in terms of going back and revisiting the special order in order to add any additional clarification?
Yes, sir. If I may, Chief, the special order, if this is approved by this body, will be put on the department land if it's important enough, or if it's a hot thing that requires enforcement right away. It'll also go out as a Department Operations Center message. But then within a certain time frame, usually specified at the end of the order, the audit division will conduct an inspection of this. I know this topic is important to the board, and I've been talking to Dr. Jeffrey Phillips that we are going to develop an audit very quickly to inspect our compliance with getting these in front of the Police Commission. But to the extent that if there are further questions beyond, if this order gets published, further questions from this body or further clarifications required from the officers, I would meet at the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy level with Captain Jennifer Thomas of Policy Planning Division and Gloria Gruby, who, Commander Prokop's shop, who oversees the acceptance of donations, and we would work out those problems and come up with a solution and provide an update to the order.
And Commissioners, if I might add, in working with the City Attorney's Office, the administrative code relative to the acceptance of donations, this is an order that's meant to clarify and further define what a donation is. And the challenge for the department is that this morning, someone goes to Hollywood Station and provides a dozen donuts or energy drinks or some type of food or substance that that while people say, well, it individually benefits an individual officer who consumes that, the donation was made in goodwill as a drop-off. At the same time, the informal meeting that's coming up and someone says, well, I'll bring lunch. And so they bring lunch. And that's happening tomorrow. In working with the city attorney's office, we're saying, does that constitute, by the administrative code, a requirement that did come up through and be approved prior to its use by this body? If this body determines that that is the case and that is your desire, then so be it. But it would be very impractical, I believe, because of just the mechanical processes involved. The donations are meant, just as you've identified, is to identify potential conflicts and ensure the integrity of the department's operation. The concern I have, and my predecessors and others have been to enforce these acceptance of donation protocols in a manner that honors the underlying purpose of why this policy exists as an administrative code. And I agree that we have fallen short at times with what has historically been seen as a donation or a contribution that doesn't benefit an individual officer per se, but is made in goodwill upon a person that doesn't have a conflict of interest with the department, but wishes to support the department through this. And it facilitated our ability to do things, important activities, both on and off duty, that fulfill the mission of safety in this community, as well as the employee wellness of an organization of 13,000, that has the proper oversight of a commission to ensure that we don't bang into those guardrails and commit violations of ethics or the administrative code. This is the latest iteration of our effort to do that. There is undoubtedly circumstances that can be defined, and we would be happy to come up with further explanations. What wasn't covered is there is an opportunity for training that speaks to specific instances. What our officers deal best with is, I believe, and supervisors, command officers, I do, give me a set of facts or circumstances. Is this relevant to the acceptance of donation? For instance, the very question you asked. An ongoing persistent donor provides for supervisors meetings each quarter or each month. That donor operates a restaurant or an entertainment establishment in that command. Should that be something that has oversight beyond the captain? That's where I look to Commander Prokoff and our subject matter experts working with oversight from OCPP and the City Attorney's Office to interpret, as well as this body. We should err on the side of caution, would be my prediction, is that we should project those. The timing of this is, are we then projecting donations that become an obligation of an individual who says, well, I'll provide food materials, really nothing of monetary value beyond the fact of it's going to facilitate a meeting, and a supervisor's meeting on an ongoing basis. So does this commission wish for us to provide a description of that for acceptance of that donation and do that on, say, an annual basis? Fully supportive of that type of oversight and approval and transparency. This is an effort in this policy to strengthen those types of practices. To Ms. Decker, Commissioner, your remarks relative to the expectation that these matters be here before we actually execute the acceptance of those is my expectation as well. And this is in an effort to try to strengthen that. Next Wednesday is a general staff meeting for all commanding officers, and this will be a point of conversation there, as well as the distribution of the policy. It will be on the land, and I will look to frequently asked questions to be developed by Commander Prokoff's group to lay out some of these scenarios. We'll review those with the City Attorney's Office to ensure that each of those scenarios, the resulting direction is the correct interpretation of this policy and is consistent with the desires of the administrative code. Lastly, this administrative code, if a city of our size, I think is rightly framed to prevent conflicts of interest. Our interpretation is and we will abide by it, particularly these issues that become material, that become property, that become services, that become access to resources of substantial manners, that include the council's oversight and acceptance, the use and involvement of donors who are vendors. Those are areas of interest that we share And this, again, is an effort to comply with that, and that will be an ongoing process. I will ask for our audit division to prioritize this. They have a busy audit schedule, but hearing this interest and also sharing with an interest that now that we have this most recent revision, what does the second half of 2019 look like? I'm not interested in going back to 18, 17, 16. Let's put this in place. Let's get the frequently asked questions out there. Let's give it 90 days, and then let's look and see how do those processes are we abiding by.
And,
What happens at the end of 90 days?
The inspection by audit division to look at a sampling of what the donations actually look like, and some query to what are items that were not reported to ensure compliance with those that fall, those that we know and those that we don't. I don't want it to be a forensic level. We'll ask audit division to forego some of their requirements historically that require these things to be so forensic in nature that they become almost a paralysis of 6 months or a year to get accomplished. I want to get a quick report back to you. I would project that first quarter of next year would be a time to revisit this and to give a snapshot of what our donation, our performance, and compliance with these responsibilities look like.
And Chief, just a few questions and comments, but with respect to that audit, from what you're describing, I would think we'd be able to identify anything Commissioner Bonner is highlighting as potentially being a concern where perhaps something was not presented as a donation and should have. Is that what you're saying? And that would be a good time to do a correction or a reevaluation of?
Yes. What further aspect of this? What again, what gets visibility and comes to administrative services as a request for acceptance of a donation. This process is two-pronged. Just yesterday, I received a request for acceptance of a donation from Hollenbeck area from a donor and I wanted to ensure that it went back to Hollenbeck with the expectation that they're going to follow up now that I'm approving that it should be something we formally request this commission to accept, that paperwork be forthwith. This process those are the ones we know about. I expect this inspection, not audit, inspection, to take on Hollywood area, they're probably listening, but another area to look at a sampling of what were things that they chose, what food events, what staff informal meetings did they not provide information, did not make the request, and how does that marry up with these requirements to see if there's any violations.
And I would only add one additional comment to what I said earlier, Chief. And while it is our expectation to see everything before the money is expended, I do want to add, we don't want to create an impractical environment where a member of the community out of the kindness of their heart starts bringing things to the department, and in which case, obviously, we would want to, if you determine it's something that should be coming to the board, we would not, I don't think, hesitate to review that after the fact. But we do want to shift the department from presenting all of the donations after the fact to, particularly since many of these are planned, the events are coming, it's to support the cadet program or other programs or to gain equipment for the department that's not funded. There's much planning that can go into this, and we'd like to see that shift.
I agree, and thank you, and we'll take that direction. I will also volunteer that I believe just as there are travel requirement requests that are state 45 days, and when we cannot meet that 45-day requirement, we have to place material information as to why that requirement could not be met. Future requests for acceptance of donations to this body will include an explanation as to why it was done after what circumstances. And those circumstances, I believe, in some instances will be material in the sense that unavoidable. I think there'll be other instances, however, I project or assume, I know there's a belief that there's other circumstances, and I tend to agree that were avoidable, but just got hung up in a bureaucracy and lacked initiative, lacked a focus. And that's where we've got to call those out if we intend to improve the responsiveness to these requirements.
Thank you, Chief. I'd find that explanation very helpful, so thank you.
Do we have any public comment?
Wait,
sorry.
not done. Got a couple others to review here. On page 2, there's a section that's referencing the commanding officer's responsibilities, and it says the commanding officers are responsible for all donations received by and used within their command. Should they also have the responsibility for the front end of that? I mean, the request for or the solicitation of any donations, or why is that not included as in this section?
What was that last part, sir?
So this gives to commanding officers the responsibility for donations received by their command. And the question is, what, if any, responsibility do they have or should they have relative to the solicitation of donations?
As far as them initiating solicitation for?
Whatever the role is. In other words, I understand if I'm a commanding officer, I have responsibility for things that are received within the command. But do I have any responsibility for those things that the command may seek or solicit?
Yes,
what's that?
He or
what's
she
that
absolutely
involvement?
does. Yeah, and I'm just, I would guess that a set of circumstances where some type of need at the police facility or station, painting of walls or.
And Commissioner, I draw you to page 2 of the document. Fully identify the donor, the reason for the donation, and indicate whether the donation was solicited by or on behalf of the department. So I'm for instance, aware right now of a command within the Valley Bureau that facility conditions are woefully inadequate. The facility has not been painted, it has not had carpet or surface coverings that have been updated since nearly its creation 20 years ago. And as an employee wellness initiative, that captain, that area command, wants to present to the community an opportunity. What's important, so that is a solicited donation. Because our building facilities, while we make repeated requests year after year for facilities maintenance, that deferred maintenance has real consequences on our ability to operate. In such an instance, I expect that the request through my office identifies that as a solicited donation, and that document from me to this Board of Police Commissioners will say that this was a solicited donation. You have seen, and there are prior documents, for instance, out of Counterterrorism Special Operations Bureau, of solicited donations for particular items that met mission-critical issues that were needed that would not fit within the city's budgetary process. So I believe this is responsive to that.
And that's, in fact, that's kind of what I'm recalling as well, is that we have seen some that were solicited, which meant that they were requested in some way, shape, or form. And what I'm looking for just is some clarification that there are some controls on the front end of that process as well, that we're not just looking at, we've got some controls on receiving and reviewing, making sure that's appropriate to receive it, but let's also make sure that it's appropriate, that in a solicited situation, that the solicitation itself is appropriate.
So I would follow up with that each of our commanding officers are held under the city's ethics code and makes our Form 700 filers, and are also receive training in ethics specific to the issue of conflicts of interest and identifying those conflicts and avoiding them. Having a conflict of interest in and of itself does not mean that one can't pursue it. It just needs to be identified, and an independent reviewer of it at a appropriate place within the organization identifies that there is a conflict, which goes to Commissioner Decker's point about why such review is important prior to the acceptance, is that while a commanding officer or bureau or even a chief of police may believe that this vendor does not pose a conflict of interest, that there's a wall around them, but yet their generosity and their willingness to be philanthropic should be supported, this commission may feel otherwise. And we want to ensure that there's a timeliness of that consideration, so that this body, which is responsible for donations less than $17,000 approximately, has that authority. For donations above that amount, this body, of course, must forward that to the city council, and with the concurrence of the mayor, determine whether those conflicts exist. I think those thresholds at those dollar amounts, given the size and complexity of our society today, are appropriate, and actually are substantially conservative in the face of what could constitute true influence or conflict.
I'm gonna come back to the conflicts concept or issue in just a second, but again, with regard to any donations that are solicited, I'm going to assume that it's almost like a pyramid, that at the bottom there's a greater number of donations and things that are solicited or people think it'd be nice to have, and then at the top are the smaller number of those that actually are either received, whether they're solicited or not, but those that come to us. In other words, I assume we see a much smaller universe of donations than that some are denied at the command level, some are just, we don't. So that's what I'm looking on the clarification on the front end of who screens out and whose job is it on the front end of the process to say, no, we're not even asking for this, or no, this is not an appropriate thing for us to receive a donation for. So who screens those things out before they even come here?
That's at the command level, sir. That'd be at the, commanding officer level in discussion. Hopefully, him or her is having that discussion with their bureau chief and staff, trying to seek guidance prior to an active solicitation, because I'm sure there's a historical perspective that he or she may not have. That screening occurs at that level.
The command development school that each of our commanding officers go through, that is a multi-week process, has a segment that talks about donations. This is a department that had police games in the 1930s that were nothing more than should be described as extortion. It was a period of corruption that, again, businesses and interests could buy their way into enforcement criteria. So our history is not so distant that we don't identify and critically expect senior leads, police officers, and others not to actively solicit anything for that matter. Acceptance of gratuities is a stated policy within the organization that's incumbent upon each individual, and I think that's where the acceptance of donations really begins, is that prohibiting the acceptance of gratuities at the individual employee level, and then as an organization, when we start accepting donations, which a gratuity one could see as a synonym, how is that transparent? How is that brought up and the lights are up so everyone understands what those items are? For instance, as chief of police, the unsolicited donations that I receive regularly, I provide an annual report on the value and the identifier of those, and I would like to identify the disposition of those unsolicited items as well that are distributed to the historical society or given to members of the organization or units, so that because I wish to ensure that my integrity is protected and that I'm not being seen as being influenced or coerced into policy decisions or direction because of a relationship of an individual's generosity.
Well, thank you. And I would ask that just when you're both in the course of the training and the process of getting the word out, and if you're taking another look, that you look for an opportunity to just underscore that point as well, that it's not only the receipt of the donations, but that we should have some active effort on the front end as well. And candidly, because I can kind of accept an environment where just like inflation, there's a 2% increase every year, and you expect that there's going to be some increase. But in an ideal world, I think we would see a moderation or reduction. In other words, so that we don't evolve into an over-reliance on donations for things that either the city council has chosen not to fund or the department has chosen not to fund in the budget or something. So I just like to see an atmosphere where we're actively making sure that people are not taking donations lightly. In other words, that they should be the rare case and things that are not put forward without a lot of thought on the front end. On the fifth bullet on page 2, there's it requires that the submitted interdepartmental correspondence describe the relationship with that the donor has with the department and/or the financial interest with the city. And then list a number of things that are required to be considered there. And one question is should this include any disclosure of the donor's relationship with the actual department personnel or their family?
In regards to familial or what?
Yeah, and what I'm asking is that if I'm reading this correctly, and maybe I'm not, but it says the submitted interdepartmental correspondence shall, and then this bullet 5, describe the relationship the donor has with the department and/or financial interest with the city. And the question is, should donors in appropriate cases also disclose any relationship with individual department personnel or their family?
I would believe the fifth bullet.
Is it in there somewhere?
I would believe the fifth bullet, any potential factor that may give the appearance that there may be a conflict of interest.
Wait, she's pointing me to the next page.
I'm sorry, the fifth bullet on page 3, the top. as well as I think the general description of has with the relationship with the department, that a department employee, and this was a subject of controversy, significant and relative to acceptance of donations involving a family member that that had an animal that was donated to the organization. So to that end, was there a conflict of interest, and then identification of that relationship so that that conflict could be vetted out and determined by the chief of police and ultimately by this board of police commissioners, given that dollar amount. And in that instance, it was all found to be that the conflict that did not exist to the point that there was that it should be denied. But the appearance was understood, and the organization changed and modified its processes to identify the donors more clearly in the internal documents, but also in the documents to this body. That in that instance, the internal documents that relationship was called out, but the document that came to this body did not. And that was an evolution of our processes to ensure that in the future, the donation request would also accompany my correspondence to you, to this body, that the donation request, which has the donor's identity, would be in the accompanying paperwork. And most recently, working with the executive director, we ensured that again the commissioners had access to those in the documents for each commission meeting.
I think what I'm directed, I think, to the language, what you think of as a catch-all section that refers to any other potential factors that may give appearance of a conflict, and that's fine. I think what I'm emphasizing here is that people should understand that relationships of their family members are also a high-risk area in my view. And as I'm reading this, it could be captured in that catch-all language if somebody thinks to consider whether that a family member relationship is a potentially a conflict area. But it doesn't expressly identify the need for the donor to disclose or for anyone to consider a relationship with an individual employee of the department or their family member, as it does reference really the department generally in the city. So I'd like to make sure that there's some understanding, and when the word goes out, that and a future opportunity maybe to include that. On the same point as well. If this isn't in here already, I would think that we should also make sure that there's a process for ensuring that donations ultimately, or when you receive something, particularly I'm thinking of a cash donation, that the proceeds not be used to benefit an individual department employee or a family member as well. So if somebody's got a sister that's got a catering business and somebody makes a donation to cater an event, we got to make sure that it's not, somebody doesn't just go out and hire their sister to cater the event, or a nephew or a son that's a DJ or whatever it is. But let's just make sure, let's just make sure there's some way of making sure that people understand the appropriate uses of these proceeds as well, beyond the examples that may be referenced in the policy. Thank you.
Do you have any public comment on this item? 3A?
We have 4
Okay.
cards. Adam Smith, Wayne, Gina Viola, followed by Hamid Khan.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mohammed.
Good morning. What we're hearing about, like always, is procedure, and you all talking over each other about ethics and transparency. But what we're not hearing from any of you is about how every donation, every single one, Mr. Bonner, is approved by this board. It's not like some are approved and some aren't. And we don't give a shit. Sorry, I wrote we don't care, but now that I'm up here, we don't give a shit about boxes of donuts. You guys can joke about that. We care about millions that are regularly get approved. We care about how 3 weeks ago this board accepted $100,000 from the foundation that Soberoff sits on the board of. We care about the tit-for-tat apparent bribes we see. In 2016, a commander named Captain Whittingham sued the city, claiming racism, among other things. A former deputy chief, Stephen Jacobs, at the time the biggest receiver of drop payments, you got him there, Chief Moore, defended Beck and shit all over the character of Mr. Whittingham. In less than a month after that trial, this board approved a $25,000 donation from the police foundation for a 3-month contract for Captain Jacobs to work on special projects for Chief Beck. We care about the $250,000 per year, at least, that the owner of the Clippers keeps donating, along with Soberoff and his cronies, to put more officers in housing projects in other neighborhoods that greedy developer types use as a precursor to drive black and brown families out of housing and into cages. We care about the over $1 million that Soberoff helped facilitate from his buddy, Casey Wasserman, who chairs the Olympic Committee, who has a vested interest in the growth of the LAPD and further militarization of the LAPD leading up to the 28 games. We don't care at all about the audit division. Time and again, we see what the audit division does, or better said, what they don't do. Audit division is LAPD investigating themselves, and they provide about as much real oversight as this.
So, uh-oh. Look what I found. Next week is the annual Threat Management Conference in Anaheim. It's presented by the Los Angeles Police Department's Threat Management Unit, the LA Police Department, and the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. What is that, Eileen Decker? Well, in 2017, the two gentlemen that tried to get my fake restraining order spoke as paid
President, he's
speakers
off
at that
topic.
meeting.
Stay on topic, please.
Look, Mr. Bonner and Ms. Decker, you want me to tell you about this, or you want to play bullshit? Your choice. So, Mr. Rossiter, Esquire, and Mr. Fauble, Esquire, spoke about public participation versus threats in the city of Los Angeles.
Mr. President, he's off topic.
Next
This is
speaker,
about
please.
Wait a minute.
Of donations.
Next speaker.
Gina
Viola.
Viola.
Next speaker. Your time's up. Will you please sit down? This is your last warning. I'm going to ask for you to be removed from the meeting. Mr. Spindler needs to be removed from the meeting. Mr. Spindler needs to be removed from the meeting. Next speaker, please.
You are part of it, and I told you about this.
Okay, you can be removed. You're removed from the meeting.
You don't want to listen. You just want to sit there and go with him. He's going to put you guys in prison. That's what's going to happen.
Next speaker.
It's very difficult to sit and listen to lengthy discussions about donations for a department that already receives 54% of the city's operating budget. It's very hard to sit through. I think it's very telling that whenever a commissioner pushes folks at this table for answers, the chief inevitably takes over and has to give long explanations for people that are experts on the issue. Also troubling is what these foundations do to decimate the open bid, competitive bid process that's supposed to be part of what happens with the 54% of the operating budget that you get for the city. And that obviously isn't happening when you use the foundation monies to go in and around that for things like the purchase of drones, the purchase of dash cams, things that should be purchased through the regular processes and not outside those. Yeah, that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you.
Hamid Khan, excuse me.
Mr. Khan.
So one thing you heard was a whole lot of spin that happened right away as to how conflict of interest gets masked and how monies get masked as well. One thing that Moore did raise was the history. And if folks didn't know, the history of Red Squads in the 30s or so, that the Red Squads were actually based out of the Chambers of Commerce. And over 80% of their budget came from the manufacturers and the retailers association. Of course, within the LAPD folks, they wouldn't tell you that. So the tradition continues, because what we have to look at, the big corporate interest, we're talking about donuts, of course, like, you know, we should be talking about that shit too, but the big corporate interest that controls law enforcement agencies. How Target Corporation gave $200,000 for them to buy Palantir. Palantir has become a central piece of data processing system, which is then responsible for targeting of young people in South Central Los Angeles, black, brown, and poor bodies under the LASER program, the Chronic Offender Bulletin program. So I think we need to look at the whole universe of how this money moves and what does conflict of interest means. Let's talk about Humpty right there. Let's talk about Taser, which is now Axon. Taser donated tasers for $89,000 before they got into and changed their name and got a no-bid contract for body cameras because, of course, Soboroff was in the thick of it. And we can go on and on and on. So the question here is that we need to still look at it in the context of what their role is of protecting private property. Private property in the shape of corporations, private property in the shape of rich neighborhoods, private property in the shape of protecting white supremacy. So money is extremely central to this thing. And this issue of donation is extremely, extremely critical that we keep an eye on that and keep on hounding them and exposing them and see what sort of conflict of interest is embedded within this body itself. Right? Thank you.
Any other speakers?
No.
Okay, I'll move approval of the department's report on item number 3A. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, let's go to item number 3B, please. Do we have any commissioner questions on 3B? Okay, do we have any public comment on 3B?
No speaker cards.
I'll move approval for item number 3B.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, let's go to item number 3C. This is the department's report relative to risk management and harm reduction strategy, the annual report. Do we have commissioner questions on item number 3C? Okay.
Good morning,
sir.
Commissioners. R.F. Ali Khan, the Director of Constitutional Policing and Policy for the department. Seated to my right is Commander Jeffrey Burt, Commanding Officer, Risk Management and Legal Affairs Group, and Captain Jennifer Thomas, Commanding Officer of the newly formed Risk Management and Policies Division. What's before you today, Commissioners, is the first ever annual report regarding the risk management and harm reduction strategy that the department has produced. In the past, since 2015, when we began this strategy, it was being presented on a quarterly basis at the request of the commission. With the chief's encouragement, we decided to, this time, for the final quarter, rather than the final quarter, do an entire calendar year analysis. In addition, we have 3 additional measures that we did looking at for long-term trends, which include the prior year of 2017, the prior 5-year average, which is the information from 2013 to 2017, and then also looking at calendar year 2014. And the reason that year was chosen is that was prior to the adoption and the beginning of the implementation of the harm reduction strategy. As you may recall, for those of you who've been on the commission at that time and since then, the department embarked on a completely different approach to dealing with risk management that focused on a paradigm shift from going from how to manage risk to actually looking at reducing harms, prioritizing those harms among physical harms to the public or to officers, organizational harm that often isn't considered when we're making decisions about the impact on the reputation of the department, its impact on the workforce, and then finally financial harms, which are the payouts and other costs associated with particular harms. And not that the financial harms are unimportant. Obviously, that's taxpayer money that's going to these things, but oftentimes when the focus is on the money, it's not focused on the prevention of the harms that have a much more serious impact. As a result, there were several structural changes that came about, including the creation of the Risk Management Division, Risk Management Legal Affairs Division, and the grouping of various divisions under my new command, which included Audit Division, our Ombuds program, and other areas. And then we also decided, based on those 3 harms, to focus on 4 particular areas: uses of force, employee-involved traffic collisions, work-related injuries, and workplace conflict. We're pleased to report here is that when we look at the 3 measures that I had mentioned, that we've seen an overall positive trend in almost all the areas that we spent time focusing on, and employed the strategy which focused on prevention and intervention, that focused on specific data analysis and collaborative problem solving that would hopefully look at in different experiments to see if there would be some impact. I'll just briefly talk about a couple of these reductions. On uses of force, you've already received a very thorough report and know about the reductions on uses of force as presented by Critical Incident Review Division. We're not going to restate that here, and the content of that is not in this report. This is basically focused on the other three areas. But there have been significant reductions in uses of force for after a variety of different strategies implemented by the department over the last several years. We did find that there were notable decreases in lawsuit payouts. Now, I would like to caution any conclusions or inferences from lawsuit payouts for a few reasons. First, this is the first year that we were able to get data collected by the city attorney's office on a calendar year basis. Traditionally, it's been done on a fiscal year basis, and the reason for that is that's how the money is budgeted for payments and making sure that the books are closed at the end of the fiscal year. That makes it somewhat difficult for us. We're using all these other measures on a calendar year, but now we're looking at fiscal year, and then just conceptually it's hard. So this is the first year, and we appreciate the city attorney's work on this with us for calendar year. So many of the numbers that you'll see are based on a one-year comparison. The second reason is that there is a significant lag time between the underlying incident that results in the lawsuit and the actual payout. In fact, it can be several years because of the length of litigation, the discovery, whether it's appealed, et cetera. So to correlate it close in time is very difficult, if not impossible, which also has presented one of the challenges that we've talked about before, which is when we look at lessons learned to a lawsuit, which we always do, it's always difficult to know if those conditions still exist to something that had happened 5, 10 years ago when policies were different, people were different, et cetera. In addition, the reason why we're very cautious about using the payout amount from either a settlement or a court judgment is that oftentimes, for anybody who's been involved with civil litigation, there are factors related to why there was a judgment in the first place and the amount of a judgment that are not necessarily based on the merits of the case. It could be based on the strength of the evidence, the plaintiff, the judge that was selected, the jury that was selected, whether it's in federal court or state court, whether it was appealed, whether the judge allowed certain evidence, a variety of factors that are well beyond the actual underlying incident. We do, however, still take pretty aggressive action to try to see how we can mitigate those by early intervention in those cases, settlements where after a quick assessment, and doing what we can to drive those down. But we are very cautious of drawing any conclusions ourselves of whether a reduction is a result of any particular action or an increase. And I just wanted to mention that. The area I think of significant improvement, given the long-term trends, is in the area of employee-involved traffic collisions. We look at several different measures of that, just total numbers and accident rate. We break it down by injuries, and we're pleased to report overall reductions in that. There are a couple of areas that have spiked in 2018 that warrant some further inquiry and analysis, including an increase of 29% compared to 2017 of what we call B injuries, which are visible injuries to either a member of the public, in this case, a member to the public. B injuries are bruises, minor cuts, and other minor injuries. We want to look into that to see if oftentimes that's caused by seatbelts and airbags, hitting somebody in the face, those types of things. And then also complained of injury, where the individual complains of injuries. It could potentially be something internal. Sometimes it could be just soreness, and they're taken to the hospital in those situations. Work-related injuries, we've also seen a pretty significant decline in those, especially with the measure that we think matters, which are, we're not as concerned about claims being filed, although we are, because that could have happened because we have done a lot of training on reporting and ensuring that there's an adequate investigation and encouraging people to put in those claims. The issue is when they are salary continuation because of the injury, meaning that they have gone off duty and that they're being paid by workers' comp while they're no longer at the office. And we've seen a reduction in cases that have required salary continuation, which is the actual harm we're trying to prevent. Workplace conflict, While we have seen some decreases in payouts, as I mentioned, still the same caution, especially with the one-year comparison. But what we have found is that the programs that we've been instituting, especially our partnership with Pepperdine University in the conflict resolution course for supervisors and command staff specifically designed for LAPD, has been very successful and has improved over time. As you saw, it is very highly rated consistently, and most promising about it is that we do an after survey through Dr. Jablonski and Behavioral Science Services, and they have found that officers, supervisors, and command staff are responding pretty overwhelmingly that they've used the skills they've learned from this course in dealing with conflict in the workplace. And what is most promising, in my opinion, is something that I call the spillover effect, which is we've seen 51% of the respondents said they have used the skills they've learned with members of the community. And that is not the intent of the program, but we knew that would have a benefit that is beyond that. And because of that, Captain Thomas has also been working on an additional mediation and conflict resolution program with senior lead officers and others at Hollywood Division, using some of the same skills to use to help mediate conflicts with members of the public. So this concept, we're looking at it and expanding it, not just to workplace conflict, but conflict in other areas. I'll leave it at that and allow questions if you have any. And then also Commander Burke can say a few things, and Captain Thomas can say a few things about the particular areas, and happy to answer your questions as well.
So if you have specific questions, we can take those, or we can go drill into more detail if you like on some of the areas that we thought we could work on. So.
How would you like to go?
Either way, we can start with the questions. I'm interested in, there are certain things that happen that are specific moments that afterwards, it's interesting whether it's in a fiscal year or in a calendar year. Body cameras. Since body cameras have been, since they've been system-wide, officer complaints against officers, et cetera, the trends, the litigation, things like that, are interesting to me, whether or not it's, and I wonder if we keep any records like that in addition to whether it's just a calendar or fiscal year.
Sure. We don't necessarily have any study or analysis that we could say that the body cameras have had an impact on liability payouts. However, Dr. Craig Yoshida from Justice and Security Strategies had done an analysis of data, actually a experimental design with Newton Division and Mission and other divisions to see if there was a statistically significant impact on uses of force and citizen complaints. I don't recall if that was presented to you some time ago. It's been some time since that happened. It was in the beginning of the deployment. But he did find a statistically significant impact on citizen complaints going down, which of course can result in better outcomes. He also published, along with some other authors, based on part of that study, about the procedural justice increases that occurred, even though we were very high level. I stay atop of a lot of the research in body-worn video nationally. In fact, we've had convenings here of the leading experts. I'm not aware of any studies that have been done directly linking it to litigation, but certainly some of the outcomes that we would hope for in reductions in citizen complaints and potentially better service and also uses of force look promising.
Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation and for the report. I think, and I hope you don't mind, Mr. Alarcon, if I begin by thanking you for your service to the city of Los Angeles for many years. I understand this may be your last week with the
Yes, it is.
department.
Will you accept a friendly amendment to this approval that you withdraw your resignation?
I'll take that under submission. Thank you.
Well, at the very least, thank you for your service. And particularly with respect to this project, I recognize not everyone would willingly take on the subject of risk management. It can sometimes be a very dry area, yet as your report indicates, it's an extraordinarily important area, particularly in the area of policing. So thank you very much for taking this on and for the work that you've done. The report indicates overall a lot of progress, great progress in many areas. And of course, our questions should not in any way detract from that because, of course, there's much work to do. And I think all three of you and everyone in the department recognizes that. And so I'd like to focus on a few questions regarding the report, but then where do we go from here? First with some of the statistics and reading into them, I understand that can be very challenging, yet you've been successful in evaluating statistics and coming up with innovative programs that specifically address some certain issues. But the report highlights, some increases in certain areas, and I don't want to over-focus on the change between, say, 2 to 3 or 3 to 6, which indicates 100% increase, but not as much on the percentage, but why perhaps some things are upticking when many other things are on the downtrend, such as in the use of force. You highlighted Learys are increased, head strikes, of course, from 1 to 2, and maybe there's not a lot of analysis or data that goes into that, and the in-custody deaths. I wonder if you can just give context to some of that in any way. Commander, it looks like you are willingly taking
I can a little bit,
on.
ma'am. I had the same sort of analysis to start with when it came to head strikes. We went from 1 to 2, so I didn't focus on the reasons why in that, but the Los Angeles Police Department's use of force review report for 2018 does a really.
I remember that report well. Thank you.
Yes, it's riveting. It does I think a great job in detailing the law enforcement related injuries and then of course the in custody deaths. So I can break down. If you
And perhaps really where I'd like to go, because we did cover that in the prior hearing on that, is knowing this information and the data and being the risk managers for the department, taking that data and where do we go from here with respect to that?
Okay, so recognizing those two upticks in the areas of Learys and in custody deaths, I can tell you when it came to in custody deaths, so far, all personnel were reminded of the department expectation to immediately request medical treatment when necessary. That training was done at least twice in the last year. Physical changes were identified and corrected in detention areas to reduce and mitigate physical issues.
That was the report we received, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, maybe if I could just address this. I think out of all 4 areas, the one area that we probably do the most in trying to reduce the physical harm is the use of force area. And the reason I say that is that uses of force and all of the training and oversight and the amount of attention we pay for it starts from the first day in the academy. This is a topic that starts and is a daily thing. As you know, we've improved the policies, especially with respect to de-escalation. And have trained all 10,000 officers on that through live scenario-based and continue to do so. In fact, right now the department is doing what's referred to as command and control training. I was just there this morning, and a huge part of that is emphasizing de-escalation as a method to avoid uses of force. I think with respect to, and then of course our process of evaluating, becoming aware, especially of serious incidents, figuring out what we need to do systemically is very different than, let's say, other departments. For example, with respect to my folks, one of the 3 of us are at every 72-hour brief on any categorical use of force, are at every use of force review board, are at every signing with the chief of police and with, as you know, in the police commission. The reason for that is we are tasked, and what we focus on is, 1, early on identifying a case where there may be some liability, so we can immediately contact the city attorney's office to try to see if a settlement's appropriate. The second thing is we are looking for systemic issues. Maybe there was something related to tactics, equipment, or some issue that we are seeing a pattern at. While everybody is more focused, I think, on the incident, we try to take the longer picture. And there have been many instances where we have identified things that may not have been directly related to the application of force, but it's something that next time could be an issue and could put potential harm. That's really things like when officers are supposed to wear their vests when they're in plain clothes, when occasions where we found that there have been malfunctions in certain less lethal weapons. We've had situations where, for some reason, old ammunition was found in somebody's magazine download, and we were able to just deal with that even before the 72-hour briefing. So the systemic things that we're doing on use of force are pretty widespread, and as well as the learning of cases that have been adjudicated. And the one aspect that I was not designed for this, but we're finding is having a very positive impact on educating officers about incidents is our critical incident community briefings. We are finding that officers throughout the department are watching that. It's being used as a training tool in roll calls. And having been to many other departments and talked to different chiefs, they're using it for themselves because they think they can learn a lot from how we've handled situations and how they might be able to do it better. So I think we have to, there's a very comprehensive approach to this. There's always things we're trying to do because the consequences are so high. And so I think that's important to in terms of our approach. I would just caution on some things like a Leary. So a Leary, one thing to remember is that the Leary and the injury that may have resulted may have nothing to do with the use of force. It could be because the person has some sort of health concern, rhabdomyolysis is very common, and then also even if they have that, it's dependent on whether that particular attending physician admits them to the hospital. That's the difference between a Leary and a non-categorical use of force that may have some injury. So it's difficult to say why there's been an increase. That could be part of it, and we can certainly follow up. In custody, that's similarly, there may not have been any use of force whatsoever. Maybe there were other contributing factors, and of course we look at that. And then head strikes, obviously there's only one.
And Commissioner, if I could follow up, I've asked internally for OCPP to provide a report to me relative to the Learys, to the whole issue of in-custody deaths. You know, what are the 2 to 7 that occurred from 17 to 18? A broader context. Are those, for instance, just last week, actually yesterday, I signed a report that will be coming to this commission involving an in-custody death of an individual who was on the freeway and stopped by the CHP because he's wandering on foot, and in a circumstance of trying to provide for his safety, he overdosed on the methamphetamines that he had secreted in his body, a ball of methamphetamines. That is an in-custody death, and so I'm interested in when we had 2 in 1 year and 7 in the next, were there instances there where narcotics were playing a major role, or were those in-custody deaths in an in-custody setting, such as a custodial setting, and what were the circumstances of those? So I've asked for a follow-up on I'm interested, as you are, in not avoiding the tactics of avoiding the tactic of 1 to 2, 100% increase, being swayed by that. But at the same time, head strikes are such a area that is so closely scrutinized that it's worth looking at those, and the numbers are so small. Was there anything readily apparent that was easily done? Where we're going with this is not just a follow-up on those use of force issues, but also I've asked for a follow-up on the employee-involved traffic collisions where visible injuries increased +9, a total of 9 across the entire organization. That's in the face of year after year decreases in employee-involved traffic collisions. I want to thank Captain Thomas. Her ingenuity, and was detailed some of it in the report, as to efforts to bringing awareness to our officers. One of the most dangerous actions and one of the most threatening environments an officer is engaged in is driving. And defensive driving is a responsibility, but there are also other subtle changes, if you will, I'll say nudges, that have, I believe, helped reduce injuries and reduce collisions. But I believe that this report, as comprehensive as it was, these areas warrant another run by. Lastly, 2 issues, the payouts on physical injuries, payouts on civil rights, that increase was from 2013 to 2018. 47 of the 325 cases represented 94% of the payout. So the dollar amount, as to Mr. Alikhon's remarks, can be deceptive and can be misdirecting. What I'm asking, what we're going to do is go back at this with time, is now look at those 47 cases and what were those, why did they represent 94%? Were there anything in there, or were those outliers? those things that we cannot, and I don't want to say, we don't want to start with it, we cannot do anything about this, because that's never the process, continuous improvement. But what can we draw from that? Lastly, I believe that the arrest and control training that we have upcoming in October is a return of the organization to grappling, and we have pulled that from last year's use of force report and what we've seen the first 6 months of this year, where we've seen increases in use of force, injuries to officers increase, and it's one of the areas that Mr. Alarcon talks about, is that systemically we're looking at these one instances after another, and then we start digging into it and saying, what are some emerging strategies that we need to identify to deal with these increases, or to further reduce instances of use of force, or these other harm reduction strategies. To give you a little more context, the arrest and control strategy, that training some 10 plus years ago, was to teach physical grappling and the ability of officers to physically wrestle, if you will, with individuals, combative individuals, and not have to resort to greater forms of violence while still protecting themselves from injury or serious or death, as well as trying to effectively take the person into custody quickly and efficiently. We moved away from that physical grappling on mat work because of injury rates that we saw officers incurring as they're trying to go through those exercises to ensure they have the right muscle memory and the right abilities. This is a perishable skill. Recognizing those earlier lessons, however, I believe looking at today, the areas of where we're seeing increases in non-categorical uses of force, and some categoricals, includes people experiencing mental illness. And in our efforts to not use less lethal, because they may not be aggressively combative and may not warrant that intermediate force device, they do warrant hands-on work. And I want to ensure the confidence of our personnel and their safety, and that they have the tool set so that they can deal with those and overcome that resistance without suffering injuries, without causing or needing to inflict injuries, and to see better outcomes. That's harm reduction in play. That's what I'm proud of the work in the last 5 years that Mr. Alarcon has done and his team as they've identified these, again, I'll call them nudges and strategic moves that shift the organization towards achieving more effective operations in the sense of our goals.
Thank you, Chief. And it highlights the importance of not just relying on numbers, but understanding what's behind the numbers and where changes can be made to affect that. I'd like to turn your attention to something that on pages 56 to 64, you talk about work-related injuries and highlight things such as staph infections, mold issues, faulty boilers, vermin infestations at different stations. And obviously that became deeply concerning, particularly in light of some of our conversations about the budget of the facilities group and whether we are doing enough to ensure that the budget reflects what is needed to allocate for our facilities in order to protect all of our employees from things that no one should have to tolerate. You're to be commended for highlighting those and addressing those, if I'm reading the report correctly. But from your observations, what more can we do in that area? Because that's deeply concerning.
Well, I'll have Captain Thomas talk about it, because she and her team have actually been sort of a strike force on some of these issues and actually go to the sites and try to help coordinate. So I'll turn it over to her.
So I have 2 members of my problem-solving unit that work very closely with all the risk management coordinators. So in 2017, we created the Risk Management Coordinators Program that at every geographic area and traffic division, there's a supervisor who is overseeing harm reduction. They are like the first line supervisor who is identifying harms that may be to the employees, and they come up with strategy. And they work very closely with 2 members of my staff on a daily basis. They speak to each other, they email, or we go out to site inspections to identify those areas that need to be fixed, repair, maintenance. And we work very closely with Facilities Management Division, Personnel Department, and Personnel Division, and the engineers to identify those areas that needs to be repaired. So when there is an issue, for example, if there's a staph infection, we now have a protocol department-wide where The supervisor at that division can contact facilities management, department operations center. Everybody is involved so that the cleaning can be done right away versus having to wait. Repairs can be done right away. They create a ticket at facilities management, a work order, and the time that it takes for those repairs and cleaning to be done has been shortened because of a system that is in place now compared to what it was before. So we're constantly working with facilities management and personnel division to identify areas that needs to be fixed, and also with general services department to speed up the repair process.
Could you also, the Commissioner's question, which is very important, is often we're reacting to something that's already occurred. Could you just talk about the preventive work that you're doing at the divisions as well, with your teams to go and look at the conditions of an area?
So when we go out with facilities management to do the site inspection, we'll also identify areas that may be potentially harmed. It may not be a repair issue, but it could be a cord that is sitting out, or something that is laying there that may be harmful to the employees, that could trip the employees. So we're taking those measures, identify those issues, and telling the command officer of that division so they can take immediate action to either remove a cord that is probably a tripping hazard. We're also asking our risk management coordinators to identify places where we need to have signs put up to wash your hands. Simple reminders to send a consistent and persistent message to our employees that as we come in contact with community members who may be ill or infected with diseases, to put up signs as a preventive measure to make sure they practice safe cleaning habits. Also, when we work with personnel division where there may be a disease or a potential of a disease, that we are sending out messages through our department operations center and also to our command staff to get the message out to our employees so that they can take preventive measures. So it's not just a reactive, but it's also a preventive before something bad occurs.
Mr. Alarcon, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you in your last commission meeting. You've worked on these issues for a long time now, and you clearly have more detailed insight. What's your recommendations on next steps and where the department should go, where the commission can go on all these issues?
So I think what's important is to continue the effort to be very focused on one, systemic issues, to look at prevention and intervention mechanisms, and given limited resources, focus on that as opposed to the litigation. I think the traditional approach is looking at litigation. How do we reduce litigation? Litigation, as I mentioned, has a lag time. Whatever harm has already occurred. You can learn some things from that, but the emphasis needs to be how do you analyze, how do you prevent the things that are happening today? The second thing, I think, very pleasantly, that has helped the department reverse the trends that were occurring before is just shifting the paradigm and not talking to cops about risk management. Police officers are paid to take risks. They don't understand when we say don't take risks. Chasing after somebody with a gun is very risky. Driving full lights and siren to respond to a shooting is very risky. What we emphasize to them, it's about not taking unnecessary risks and reducing the harm that could be caused to the public and to you. And what I found is that has resonated well at the roll calls, and I've also seen that language adopted from Chief Moore, Chief Beck, and the command staff. And I think that's made a significant difference in the way we talk about this and emphasize this and permeates. I also think that the risk management coordinator program is very important because the whole approach to the creation of this division has not been to centralize everything. It has been to be the hub of the wheel. If you're going to have specific interventions and awareness of what's going on in 21 areas and 4 additional traffic divisions in a large organization, we need to have people embedded on the ground who are watching for that and our connection on a regular basis. They meet with Captain Thomas's folks twice a year?
Twice a year. We had our meeting last month.
Right, for a full day of training, discussion, exchanging of best practices and different things. I think structurally that has also been very helpful. And then the last thing I would say is, or two other aspects that I think are important. One is we have started, and one of the things we've been doing is outside research partnerships with academic institutions and especially with people, data scientists. It is putting this report together is very challenging, and we really appreciate the work that everybody has done to do that, but we do not have the systems to put this data together on a regular basis, nor do we have the statistical expertise to really dig into it to see correlations and calculate probabilities and those types of things that will be helpful. We have a partnership now with the California Policy Lab. This is a consortium between UCLA and the University of California, Berkeley, where they have data scientists, criminologists, sociologists, and they're providing analytical capability to us. They're currently working on 14 years of vehicle pursuit data that we've provided. There is a very thick report that's on my desk that I intend to read before I leave the department this week. And I know Commander Burt, who's been very invested in the program and looking at it, it has very important findings and probabilities, some of which will challenge conventional wisdom and will help us identify what are causes to crashes and injuries to others. And then finally, our two other things, we also have a partnership with the University of South Carolina and University of Florida. We're doing a research project. I was at it this morning to use body-worn video to see how officers assess threat. It's a threat of an individual. We have them fill a survey instrument indicating their background and different factors. They watch a video and then they assess what the threat is. We're hoping from that we can learn a lot about why inevitably there are variations in the way police officers and the public see the same thing differently. And that threat issue goes towards whether they should use force, whether they're properly assessing it. We expect to have a very large sample size since all of the officers in the department are going through this. They're taking this survey instrument before the training and after, so maybe one of the first times we'll be able to assess a particular training, and this is the command and control, which also involves de-escalation. And we have really the leading police criminologists in the country doing this analysis, which I think will be very helpful and be replicated. And then just finally on employee-involved traffic collisions, when I first came to the department, as you know, I came from the airport, LAX, and one of the things there, they very much focus on safety within aviation, and there's a system known as HFACS, the Human Factors Analysis and Classification System. This was a method that was used to reduce human errors in aviation crashes. Once mechanical issues were almost eliminated, they realized most aviation accidents are from human error. And so it's a system that's used to identify what are those human factors that contribute to error and bad results. When I first came to the department, we started looking into that, and I really wanted to see how we could apply that here. But we weren't at a stage to do that. There was a lot of work that needed to be done on the analysis. I believe we are at that stage now. The chief is having Commander Burt and Dr. Pinnell attend HFACS training, and we're looking at ways, and we have an HFACS expert in-house in our air support, who is going to help us look at specifically on traffic collisions. And are there things, human factors, that can be addressed in driving, the types of vehicles, et cetera. And I think going forward, that's the depth of analysis and ability that we really need if we want to make differences and continue to drive these numbers down.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. A couple of questions. One, just to recap, I think it was a long discussion of the report itself, just the nature of the report. And I'm understanding this is primarily a quantitative report, and the qualitative value is attached to whatever the reader takes from the data. I mean, that may not be the most artful way to say it, but is that reasonably accurate that this is primarily a quantitative report and not qualitative? In other words, we can't draw a lot of conclusions about why there was a reduction or an increase just based on the data reported in the tables.
Well, I would say it's both. We try to the extent possible put some qualitative information in there, and where we can reasonably draw some inference, we can, but we don't want to overstate because we have not done a controlled method or have the sophistication to do an analysis that a particular intervention resulted in a particular reduction. I do think that I think that the overall efforts that we've been using, I think a reasonable inference could be something's working, and all the efforts that we were making logically make sense, but we can't identify any particular factor that may or may not have an impact.
And why, since it occurs to me that the amount of payouts appears to be the key metric that kind of goes through at least particularly in the use of force, but other areas, why is that the best metric?
We don't believe that's the best measure, and if I didn't make that clear earlier, I think...
No, you did. That's why I'm asking,
Yeah,
so if it's not, is there a plan to continue looking for a better metric or a more impactful metric, or are we going to just produce the same report knowing that it has some inherent weaknesses?
Well, I think it's important to know where the money's going and where the payouts are. That's certainly a focus of the City Council, the mayor, the department, and we do think it's relevant. But I don't think we can take that as a sign of success or failure, especially with any particular intervention. I would not say that's the strongest metric. I think it would be a mistake to assume that, oh, it went down, so this must be working. That may not be the case, and it would be very, very difficult to correlate the two. I do think the metrics that we should consider and do are a broad array of things, as we've tried to do. On uses of force, the extensive amount of data that's there, and to the extent we can, outside research partnerships to actually analyze the data in a statistically sound method would be useful, but we don't have that capability.
On page 11, this is on table 1, that's on page 11, and I'm just, I think, making the same point. There's the fourth line down, I suppose, relative to false arrest and detention imprisonment. And when you're looking at the 17-18 data, and it's if you look at just the percentage of change, it's reporting an 80% decrease. But the number of payouts was only a 4, went from 30 to 26. So is that meaningful in something? It's a data point, but I'm trying to attach some meaning and some value to it. Is it what does it tell us about risk management relative to when it's laid out this way?
So this would obviously be something that we would flag, and we have, and we dig into it deeper. I believe this was a case, can I say this?
Yep, go ahead.
In which there was a wrongful conviction payouts or there was a series of wrongful conviction, false imprisonment, wrongful conviction payouts for people who had been arrested 20 years ago. And we can provide additional data with the breakdowns of that, but that may have been a cause for the spike. So the reduction this year is not necessarily a result of anything that we've done in the interim, simply because those cases have now come to settlement or trial, and they're now being paid out.
I think I kind of recall, an earlier, we may have seen one version of this report around this time last year, I think, and there was a discussion, I believe, of something along those. Is that in this report also? That the story? I was aware. Yeah, there was a discussion of the fact that there had been a number of cases from many years ago, and so on. What I'm asking, is that in this? That's in this report as well?
Yes.
That description. Okay. I think that's really the main questions I had. I mean, I'm just pointing out again that it's still a report that I think is heavily quantitative in nature for some of the reasons you're suggesting, but we should continue working to figure out how we not, in some cases, give what might be thought of as a false impression in terms of progress. Like I've just used that one example where someone could say, hey, we had an 80% reduction in payouts and false arrest and detentions. And I'm not really sure that tells us very much about what's going on across the city as we sit here today, or what happened. So it's not a criticism per se, it's just what I perceive as a limitation in the report. And so we'll try to figure out some way going forward to try to enhance, put this in perspective, not only for those of us here, but anybody else who may, be reading and understanding where the department's going from a risk management standpoint.
And just so you know, we agree with you 100%. And in fact, that was the problem in previous approaches, was solely focusing on the payout amount and nothing else. what you have before you is probably the most data we've ever compiled with the different measures in the history of the department. So we're not relying on payouts as an indication of it. It is obviously good that they're going down from a fiscal point of view, but drawing any correlation between that and our efforts would not be accurate. So what we've tried to do is have a series of measures to see if there's an overall downward trend. And I think that's why when you look at especially the 3 measures we've included in this report, and when you see a consistent decline across all 3 comparisons, we're more comfortable saying we're definitely going in the right direction. Whether it's one thing or all the things, quite frankly, we're going to continue doing all the things in the first place.
And Commissioner, I want to really weigh in on that. We have to be able to interpret data imperfectly. We can't just look at this and find reasons why it may not meet a forensic standard or some international standard of you can directly correlate causation from one thing to another. These are very complex matters, and I really want to draw attention to, I think Mr. Alarcon really began this initiative by talking about characters of harm, operational challenges, and control. This was research done by the Kennedy School of Government out of Harvard by a Professor Sparrow, who teaches and deals with senior law enforcement officials. I think one of the leaders in looking at harm reduction and how our traditional approaches have chased the dollars. And in fairness, they've chased the dollars because elected officials and the public expects us to utilize and to recognize that those expenses, monies that go to payouts, is not going to public safety. They're going to not going to public service. They're going to individuals. And can we anticipate that and avoid those? And we have that as an obligation. But I'm proud of the work that Mr. Alarcon brought on board that shifted this organization, I believe, to a very best practice standing today. And we will continue to answer the question to focus on what we believe are the 4 focused areas of our greatest harm, which is use of force, employee-involved traffic collisions, work-related injuries, and workplace conflicts, and identify problem-solving strategies that deal with the untying of the knot, if you will, the complexities of what's contributing to these matters. Those are critical strategies, and this report obviously must be data-driven, and there is qualitative aspects of what strategies we're using that we believe are contributing to these successes. So this represents our work today. It also, and I'm very appreciative of this body, the OCPP, not overstating it, identifying that these are things that we believe have some association, but to what degree? We work with and are active with university academia to say, come in here and look at our work and what can you see? Is there things that we can statistically say? And what I find and what we have found is there's just so many variables and so many of just life and uncontrollable circumstances, and nobody's willing to be the control that does nothing. And so every agency is taking on these issues in a variety of methods, and we're sharing what we believe are best practices and working through the evolution of this. It is a continual process, one that I believe that as Mr. Alarcon departs, he leaves us a tremendous framework and has accomplished quite a bit. And I want to save my last remarks relative to this once the commissioners have had, if you have no further questions, before you make a motion.
Yeah, I just had one. And did this report, or did it, or can it in the future present any of the information also on a geographic basis? So, like when we think about the first bullet, the 43% decrease in civil rights related lawsuits and payouts in 27 compared to 17. Do we know how that looks geographically, like where the larger share of lawsuits and claims and those kinds of things are occurring across the city?
I don't think we've done that analysis, but we can certainly work with the city attorney's office to see if there are any patterns and what other measures to make sure we're not disproportionately attributing it to an area which may have just more contacts or more the nature of it, but we could certainly look at that to see if there's any patterns.
Thank you. Commissioner, if there's no other questions, I would just, I want to echo some earlier remarks, and I wanted to save them to the end because I wanted to make sure that this report withstood the scrutiny of this body and this panel. relative to the department's responsibilities in such a critical area. But this is my opportunity to thank Mr. Alican as he does enter the next chapter. Arif and I have known each other for well over a decade and respect his leadership both as a Deputy Mayor of Homeland Security and Public Safety, as well as his time at the LAWA and as a Deputy Mayor or Deputy executive there. And when he came here in 2014 following Mr. Chalif's retirement, I clearly saw an individual who had, as a peer, had a tremendous ability, thoughtful mind, and a person that could take things on with an outsider's perspective. So the Office of Constitutional Policing and its origins from the consent decree really suggested and recommended and instituted an office that had an outsider's view. And the requirement of that individual is so important that they not be a homegrown. That they're an individual that is thoughtful, that is sophisticated, that is analytical, and understands law enforcement, but more importantly than that, has the ability to understand constitutional law, the role of law enforcement in a free society, and how those interactions occur, and then can effectively communicate that to all the audiences. And Arif has been a tremendous resource in that. I'm sorry to see him go, but after 5 years here, recognizing a man who has a family who's vested in, and 25 years of public service, I congratulate him and thank him for your time. You've done us well. You leave us a much better place than you found us, and to that you enjoy my gratitude as well as that of the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you so much. And if I could just say, thank you, Chief, for those kind comments, and I want to thank the Commission. You've always been very gracious and supportive of our efforts. It is hard to leave the LAPD. It's a tremendous organization that I love dearly. I've worked with great people, and I think you're in very good hands on all these issues. And I still will be an LAPD reserve officer, so I will, I will still have a connection to the department, and I hope to help in that capacity as well.
Thank you, sir. Do we have public comment on this item?
We have 9 speaker cards.
Okay.
Jonathan Foster, Gina Viola, Marianne,
Mr. Foster?
Hi, I'm Jonathan Foster. I agree with this page. I just have a different approach. I'd like to see it happen. I just don't really exactly completely feel every way you feel. Even though I do love you guys very much, you guys have done amazing things for the city, this group of people, before I ever came down here. So I'm not the strength and power of this group. This is amazing people. But I do support Trump. I don't like his presentations. So you're trying to take care of scrapes, scratches, bumps, and bruises, and I know we wish to protect all the employees, but they were hired to take a beating, so to speak. That's why you guys got hired. It's part of the job. The reputation of the department, which is something you talked about, the LAPD has not accepted responsibility for killing Eric Rivera, from what I've seen. And several people on here, it just seems like something happens. I've put up several suggestions about the head-to-toe body armor. You're doing good on trying to de-escalate. It might take 10 more years, it seems like, possibly. It's a hard issue. I get raging sometimes. Mentally ill never gets evaluated. They get killed. Okay, other than attacking others, there's no reason to kill. I already went over this with you. So, unless they're shooting at will. So, on purpose rigged economy and a middle class, low wages and hourly wages makes it so there's always a shortfall in budgeting, so that private corporations get to fill the need, or a planned recession takes place and then the struggling get, decimated, and or corporations get special attention. I agree, but no one is contributing to the changes, and that's the litigation is a scam. We've got minimum wages down. Soberoff's buddies are all in bed with this. That's the problem, that dude. You fix that problem.
Next speaker.
So this is the first ever report since 2018, and I wonder how many of these cases Officer Jeff Nolte resided over in use of force, and if those are going to be reevaluated. That would be my first question. It's good to hear you say that police are often given instruction to please be mindful when they're chasing, suspects with guns. Police in Hollywood don't even follow routine traffic laws. Just this morning, I had somebody cut across 3 lanes of traffic and make a right in front of me with not even a turn signal on. Chief, I'm delighted that you are concerned about in-custody deaths. I am too, and also very interested in the 22 minutes of missing footage in Waukesha Wilson's death. So I'd like to see that part of this report. This commission routinely finds murders by LAPD in policy, like the murder of Melly Corrado at Trader Joe's in July of 2018, or the murder of Elizabeth Tollison in front of a homeless services center in Van Nuys a few weeks before, or the killing of Eric Rivera, Jesse Romero, Kenny Watkins, Omar Gonzalez, and literally hundreds of others. In 2018, the city alone paid out $9 million in taxpayer dollars in wrongful death lawsuits. And while I'm delighted that you're not focusing on litigation and you're trying to focus on this systemic problem, and I'm glad that you phrased it that way, it is a systemic problem that you have in your department, it's not lost on us that $9 million of taxpayer money went to try and make right what was wrong. So which is it? Is the commission routinely rules the wrong way, or is it the policy that the LAPD is wrong? Or murder is the policy and that you are all enablers of that policy? Because as I've sat here year after year, that's how I see you now, as enablers of the policy that the LAPD routinely murders people, black, brown, and poor people. You do nothing about it.
As I kind of listen to this report, it's kind of just feels designed to mire us in data around money and fiscal payout and officer injury, and to distract, right, to get us on that tack. I'm not particularly interested in that part. I'm definitely interested in what feels like you all seem to. It feels like you all believe this is a miscommunication with the public that you all have, that you're out trying to do something, you're doing something great, and that the public misunderstands that. And what I would say is with body camera data and such like that, when you all have custody of that, yet it is not shown to the community, how do you possibly imagine that helps community trust? If, when folks say over and over again that they're more afraid of the police than they are of any other societal issue we have going on, when does that resonate? When do you start listening to that? And what's at the root of that? It's not in your payout data. As we continue to, you're part of this contriving and conflating of, I lost track of where I am. I guess it just shows, y'all are a loss of words for me. I'll be back.
You can come back during public comment as well.
I sure will.
Audrey George, Adam Smith, Hamid Khan.
I couldn't help but note that Chief Moore was very worried that this report survived the scrutiny of the board, but he did not mention at all any concern about how the public feels about it. I also want to mention it's exasperating and offensive to hear the officer in charge of this report insert Greg Uchita's name regarding efforts for harm reduction. Greg Uchita is a villain, not a hero in that matter. He is a driver of LAPD's deadly predictive policing strategies. Keep in mind, the LAPD continues to be one of, if not the most violent and harmful police department in the country. So this report regarding use of force says LAPD is enhancing its training on de-escalation, use of less lethal devices, Fourth Amendment compliance, and implicit bias. But the LAPD continues to ignore the systemic nature of its racist targeting, oppression, excessive use of force, and murder of black and brown people. All the working you can do with the Museum of Tolerance is not going to undo that culture. They also talk about working on skills training on building community trust, preserving life, and procedural justice. That is not going to reverse the culture and the systemic nature of the violence. Just one more thing is that they talk about how in July of 2018, the Tactical Directive 4.5 reiterates that less lethal force options are not justified merely by verbal threats of violence or suspects' noncompliance. That is not enforced.
Next speaker, please. And come back during
Adam
public
Smith.
comment. This report claims that the police commission is, quote, building community trust with the use of body cams and digital in-car video systems, and with the release of body cam footage after LAPD shootings of residents by officers. Notice the language that I used there. You guys should try it. Where are you getting the info that you're building community trust? I mean, is that just your opinion? Is there a poll that you've taken with body cams specifically? We know your body cams are collecting, I don't know, tens of thousands of hours per week of footage, and you're releasing a little, like what percentage are you actually releasing? How is that building community trust? What are you doing with the other 99.9% of the hours that you're collecting across the city? How can you be building community trust with body cams? In the moments before Officer Edward Agdepa murdered Albert Ramon Dorsey in October, who was naked and in the shower at 24 Hour Fitness in Hollywood, both body cams mysteriously fell off the officers. And when these things are released, these so-called critical incident videos that are heavily edited and narrated by your PR team, how is that building community trust? Just yesterday, one was released, didn't even have any body cam video because it was about the murder of Kenneth French and the shooting of his elderly parents at the Costco in Corona, and Josh Rubenstein is there being like, well, the officer was attacked. We don't know that the officer was attacked. That's what you guys say. That's not building community trust. We know that all of this stuff is to further your surveillance. When the two officers, Urrutia and Ramirez, murdered Eric Rivera on June 6th, 2017, the in-car video...
Next speaker, please.
Mr. Khan?
So I'm glad, Bonner, that you raised this thing about the more like similar to a procedural audit that the OIG does, because the meat of what's going on is, of course, never going to be raised by folks like this. And when you hear the language of statistically significant, I mean, we need to really take a pause at what the heck does it really mean, because it means nothing. It's just an abstraction that has been created and to mask the real thing. And I think the question is that when we talk about harm reduction for whom? Harm reduction for the department, because it's harm enhancement for the community. That's exactly what's going on. That's where the body cameras come in, because even remember when the body, and you were not here when body camera report was submitted, there was only 2 paragraphs that Soboroff signed off to and raised money from his rich buddies for body camera program. There were only 2 paragraphs about impact on the community. The rest of all was all about civil liability on LAPD. So it's harm reduction from liability for the department that we are talking about. Because harm enhancement, let's look at the iWatch program. How See Something, Say Something is being weaponized to give a tool and a license to racially profile by white communities when black, brown, and poor folks go into their communities. And your own IG gave that audit that we saw that. Here are folks over here. Let's look at harm enhancement. Whose reduction is it? Infiltrated 4 times in their own meetings trying to do political work. right? Trying to call out a fascist regime. Is that harm reduction? Let's talk about harm reduction about since 2011. 5 years LAPD has led in murdering the most people of any police department in the country. Is that harm reduction? Let's look at more harm reduction about predictive policing. And then Craig Uchida's name, Audrey has raised. I mean, that guy is solely responsible and discredited and disgraced by Moore himself when the architect of the program, Craig Uchida and Laser program, was dismantled back in April. Chronic offender bulletin program was dismantled, where he calls people tumors in the community. Is that harm reduction? So the issue here is that we're looking at harm enhancement.
Come back during public comment. Next speaker.
Jeremy Tramer, Gina DiPietro, Paola Minor.
I mean, I just want to first say I'm excited I'll be able to finally hear myself think for once, since Sandra isn't here to constantly butt in with her famous long-winded lectures. Anyways, this report is just one of an endless number of examples of this commission and the LAPD valuing money over lives. On the very first page, under the heading Uses of Force, the first 2 bullet points give statistics about LAPD civil rights-related lawsuit payouts. Then, the third bullet point is statistics about officer-involved shootings. This is a very literal example of putting profit over people. It's clear where your priorities lie. And this fits into a pattern. Another obvious example comes from Steve Soboroff. In an April interview, he was asked, have the results of the body camera program been what you had hoped? He responded, quote, it's substantial. I don't have the exact numbers, but even if we reduce a few lawsuits against the department, it pays for itself. That was his entire answer. The body cameras were framed in terms of profit, not in terms of lives lost or saved. The financial bullet points in this report can't undo the damage done by your bullets. You frame the deaths of the people you claim to protect and serve as market inefficiencies rather than human tragedies. And from that standpoint, the report is a clear win for the LAPD. It cites a 43% decrease in civil rights-related lawsuit payments from 2007 to 2018, but only a 25% decrease in officer-involved shootings over the same period. What a bargain. You figured out how to reduce your payout per shooting. You must be so proud. The loved ones of people you've killed have been coming here for years and powerfully telling their stories of loss, but most of you commissioners who sit there listening seem completely unmoved by them, especially Soboroff. I wonder if these grieving families focused their remarks on the exorbitant funeral expenses they had to pay. Would that be enough to finally get the commissioners to feel their pain? Could it be what finally breaks through your poorly concealed disdain? Would one of you even perhaps shed a tear?
Next speaker.
Gina DiPietro.
Good morning, LAPD Commission. I'm Gina DiPietro. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the officers who have composed this report. Congratulations on moving on to future endeavors as well. Thank you to the officers in the room who are also putting their lives at risk. I know this report isn't that report. This report is a risk management report based on statistics and qualitative and quantitative data mixed that we're looking at here, but I wanted to focus on how something actually that Vice President Decker focused on, which is the newer risk, I would say, that the cleanup task forces are facing when they come across encampments. And perhaps we need to be more focused on the real threat of infectious disease that is coming across because of fecal matter, because of human waste, because of measles, because of typhus, all of these newer real risks, which are touched on in the report, but perhaps maybe should be more widely addressed. I worry for the officers who are doing these cleanups. I worry that they don't have the kind of training necessary when dealing with biohazards. So also, fecal matter.
You know, she didn't interrupt you, and you're not going to interrupt her. I just did. If you do it again, I'm going to ask you to leave.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, next speaker.
Paola Minor.
I too have to agree that this report that talks about harm reduction strategy is really talking about how can LAPD save money based on the problems that it is facing and the problems it has caused. I just recently read an article, and I thought it was interesting, where it said the policies, the practices, and the procedures and actions of LAPD serve as the dark underbelly of the city of Los Angeles. When we look at this particular report and how it talks about things as if they have no impact on the community, that they only have impact on LAPD's costs, actually the city's costs, actually taxpayers' costs, and most of us are taxpayers. You know, you say it's a systemic problem, some of the things that occur. Systemic problems like police brutality, like police murders, like police not being aware of traffic rules, police running with guns. The harm reduction report speaks about trying to control and reduce amounts of payouts. One simple way, of course, to reduce payouts, especially payouts based on murder, is de-escalation. You know, I mean, it's a direct correlation. Stop questionable murders of black and brown and poor people. And whether these payouts come from settlements or whether they come in the court, they can be avoided and they can be reduced.
George Buzetti and Lucas Martin.
The last two on this?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Hold my pants up because my new belt broke because we got such high quality in this world today, like this joke place we're living here and that joke guy in your risk management, okay? And I say that for a reason, 54 years of civil rights. Well, you say that your problem's outside of going down, but damn, initiated workplace investigations up 25%. Investigation per 100,000 up 24%. Lawsuits filed up 36%. I've been doing this a long time, sober off you joke. Now, do any of you know about Curran Price's deal on how the arts help stop violence in the jails? That's only May 3rd, 2013. I don't think you're doing your job there, Alicon, you joke. How about the sheriff's report from 2012, Education-Based Incarceration, the ultimate crime-fighting tool, huh? Damn, you missed that one too, didn't you, jerk off? Maybe you ought to have me teach you this shit. Now, how about U.S. judges see epidemic of prosecutorial misconduct in state by Kamala Harris just before she got elected senator? Wonder why she's having deep shit? Where do they find out about this? Because she committed crimes on me and let the DAs falsely put felonies on people across the United States. I mean, California. Now the shit's coming down. Like on you, Soberoff. You see, Mr. Telfink sent me the transcript of the 5/5 Police Commission meeting where you erased the audio. Go to George Buzetti YouTube right now and watch the video where they erase the audio. Felony. You see this package here you're getting in the next thing?
Next speaker, please.
Thank you very much, fools.
Hello, for the record, my name is Lucas Martin. I'm a Johns Hopkins University Science Writing Master's student, and I worked at the Center for Harm Reduction as an intern, employee, and volunteer in Skid Row. So I read your 64-page report, and I have a few notes and a couple things that you didn't point out in your report, or in this delivery. First of all, as people have noticed, the order of priority, you're prioritizing the money over the human cost. You did say in the text portion that you shouldn't do that, but in all the tables, all the summaries, you literally prioritize the litigation money over the human cost. Statistical significance. A lot of times you have numbers as low as 6 to 4, and you call that a 50% difference. 1 to 0, you call that a 100% difference. And I agree with Hamid Khan that statistical significance is not the be-all, end-all of the numbers, but I think you're misrepresenting the numbers when you are summarizing with percentages that aren't actually statistically significant, are insanely insignificant. I think, based on what I read, you should separate civil rights violations from excessive force, as not all civil rights violations are excessive force. I've come here multiple times to talk about Narcan confiscations in the Skid Row area. Those aren't excessive force. There's no physical harm done, but people die of overdose because your officers confiscated 173 Narcan kits in 5 years. Two things I wanted to point out. Retaliation was the largest source of grievances in workplace conflict. That was on page 52. I think that's consistent with the investigation done by both the FBI and other organizations like the ACLU on your organization on police gangs. And they say the fear of retaliation from your ranking officers is strong, and it's a severe problem for them, and it's a severe problem for us to feel safer. Last thing I want to point out, on page 9, you say that it takes 45 days.
You can come back during public comment and finish up. Next speaker, please.
There's no more speakers for this item.
Okay, we're going to move approval of item number 3C. Do we have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, Chief, morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. As is standard practice, my weekly report of significant incidents, crime, and personnel stats. I do appreciate, on behalf of the men and women of LAPD, this Commission's taking a moment of silence and recognizing the loss that we incurred this week ago, this Saturday. It was a phone call that no one ever wants to receive, and hearing Officer Diaz in his past, the loss and the circumstances was devastating, and something that we're still working through. Juan Diaz, 24 years of age, 2 years with the department. He grew up in Lincoln Heights, and by every description, lived with his parents, his 2 sisters, and coming from a young age, wanted to be a police officer to make a difference in his very community in which he grew up in. And by every example I've seen, I did not know the young man personally, but by everyone I've spoken with, his family, his friends, his colleagues, he was achieving his dream, but also achieving his desire, which was to make a difference in the very communities. And to see his loss, as we did, is just absolutely devastating. It was devastating not only to the men and women of this organization, but the communities in which he lived and served. I'm proud of the work that the men and women of this department rallied and brought to bear. Officer Diaz was with some friends that night, and in brief, he was attending, frankly, stopping, getting some eats, some tacos at a favorite taco alley, as it's known in that area. And when he observed a couple individuals simply vandalizing, but nonetheless spray painting, graffitiing, and he made a passing remark of, "Why are you doing this in your neighborhood?" And by the remarks that have been confirmed through this investigation. And for that action, a member of this group, of these 2 individuals which he saw, brandished a handgun. And our officer, rather than with his own preservation and safety, but also consistent with our training, chose to gather his friends and to try to leave that area. And by the evidence that we've gathered, these individuals returned, and as Officer Diaz in the vehicle with 3 others of his friends, they were viciously attacked, fatally injuring Officer Diaz with a gunshot wound, as well as another passenger in that vehicle. That Officer Diaz's vehicle left that area, and by good fortune, a few blocks away, came across an Los Angeles police officer, a motor officer, who summoned assistance. The entire organization rallied to bring our specialized as well as uniform and detective resources to bear to do a methodical and thoughtful and systematic investigation. I'm proud of the work of Acting Chief of Police, Assistant Chief Gramala, as well as that of Captain Billy Hayes and the men and women of RHD, but this was an entire whole team effort. I was away with my family on a vacation out of the country and unable to return. The mayor and I did speak regularly, as I did with this team. I could not be prouder of the work and the time and patience that they brought to bear. resulting in the arrest of 3 individuals that we believe directly responsible for his murder. Today at 2 o'clock, we'll have a press conference to provide further details about the facts and circumstances. But it is a moment of grief that we continue to go through. I've met with the family who are simply devastated, and I would ask for everyone's continued thoughts and prayers in support of them as they continue to grieve this loss. And the funeral services for Officer Diaz will be next Monday at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Angels, and a burial will follow. This will be a department funeral. He represents the 211th officer that has been killed in the line of duty within this department since 1907. It happened as this happened. We've also seen in the last 11 days of violence across this country, of what people would like to think is in immeasurable amount. But I think it would be a false narrative to suggest that the 31 people that have been killed between Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso is some new waterline. What is troubling about it is that number of deaths and the tens of people that have been injured by gunfire in just those 2 separate events, notwithstanding what happened just recently in Gilroy. This organization is working feverishly with our retailers, with our business establishments, with what would be described as soft targets, places where people gather, to have added presence. Our outreach and engagement, particularly with the Hispanic community, will continue to be steady and ongoing. The narrative today across this country, we find, is trying to place blame. As an organization, we're going to try to do everything to stress that moving forward, how do we identify individuals who have such evil intentions and bring those identities to law enforcement professionals so that we can help and assist if there are instances of dissuading or preventing or redirecting those energies to some other path than their violent expression. That is we as an organization, as law enforcement professionals, that's what our desire is. Our desire is not simply to arrest and prosecute. However, there are instances in which arrest and prosecution is absolutely warranted as an effort to stop, intercede, and to ensure the safety of our communities. As we move forward in a city of 4 million residents and tens of millions of people who frequent here, we ask for people's continued vigilance, to be mindful that there are individuals that, in listening to various voices from elected officials and others, that hear, in their view, an authorization or an encouragement to engage in these hateful acts. And simply stated, I, as a chief, and our members of our organization, hope that friends and families who have members in their circle that may be listening and being motivated by the circumstances of today recognizes that there are resources available for them. And I'll continue to stress that from LAPD's point, we cannot be at all places. But this last weekend, with the aftermath of El Paso, we did particularly focus on major retailers for added visibility, because we are recognizing as Angelinos ourselves that people are asking themselves as they go to these venues, whether it be a supermarket or it be a nightclub or an entertainment establishment, are they the next target? So we will have a continued presence in those areas as we can, and as we can try to provide some safeguard and some assurance, but yet that will not bring back 31 people, nor the tens of people that have been injured. Other matters to discuss, we prior to these issues of violence and so forth, held yet another African American forum, leadership in primarily from the San Fernando Valley, but we had members of the African American community from throughout the city that we spent a couple hours in a question and answer. This is part of my ongoing efforts to continue the Chiefs forums as a means of hearing concerns and ensuring that we're identifying strategies to address and build and deepen trust. Additionally, we met with the Major League Baseball All-Stars LA Host Committee We are beginning to formulate plans for a week-long celebration here in Los Angeles next July. So people will begin to see more and more efforts and details about that event, something on a positive note. We are a world destination, and we have not hosted the Major League Baseball All-Stars for, I think, more than 40 years. Wow. So this is going to be a great opportunity for us. I do report each week on categorical uses of force, and this past week we had a tactical discharge that, while it doesn't necessarily, it's not going to be handled as a categorical. In discussion with the Officer Inspector General, the facts and circumstances do not merit a categorical. Given the manner of what occurred, I do think it's appropriate that I bring it out and talk about it. And that is on August 2nd at about 2 o'clock in the morning in the Mission area of San Fernando Valley. Mission uniform patrol officers responded to the Mission Community Hospital that's located on the 14800 block of Roscoe Boulevard. There, the officers met with hospital staff and eventually came in contact with an individual by the name of Juan Solis, male Hispanic, 23 years of age, that was experiencing some type of emotional disruption or instability or attack, and was concerned. The hospital staff called us to help and assist them. As officers approached and began having an interaction with Mr. Solis, a use of force occurred as he attempted to run or flee from the officers and the staff. The officers took control and attempted to wrestle him to the ground, and during the course of that, Mr. Solis attempted to disarm one of the officers, and the officer's weapon, while still holstered, discharged around, injuring the officer through a graze wound to the back of his leg. Mr. Solis was not injured. The officer's injuries, fortunately, were minor, and he was not hospitalized. In the interview subsequent to Mr. Solis' arrest, statements were made to indicate that his intention was to shoot and kill the officer and others. Therefore, on the basis of his statement and the physical evidence and other witness statements, he was booked for attempt murder on a police officer. And we will obviously work with the district attorney's office relative to his emotional state and circumstances, while also recognizing that he expressly committed to what his intentions were. The other matter is I have an officer-involved shooting with hits that occurred on July 26th at 9:40 in the evening in the 4700 block of South Budlong. There, 77th Uniformed Gang Officers, gang enforcement details, were conducting an extra patrol in the area of 47th Street in Budlong near the Vermont Square Park. Officers got out of their vehicles and were conducting a footbeat through the park and observed an individual spontaneously flee from them while reaching into his right pockets. The officers formed the opinion the individual was armed with a gun and attempted to capture him. He ran into a nearby courtyard and produced a .38 caliber revolver, at which time an officer-involved shooting occurred. The individual was struck in his right hand and abdomen and transported to a nearby hospital where he's in stable condition. No officers were injured, and the individual did not fire his weapon. The individual's firearm was recovered at the scene, and the individual identified as Jaron Edmond, a male black who was booked for ex-con with a gun, a felony, and Force Investigation Division responded, as did the office of the Inspector General and the District Attorney's Officer-Involved Shooting Rollout Team, and that investigation will continue. There was also a law enforcement-related injury that occurred on the 31st of July at 9 a.m. in the morning in the 5800 block of South Olive Street. There, Newton patrol officers responded to a radio call of a man and woman dispute. The officers determined that the individual, the male, had physically assaulted his wife and taken her cell phone and was hiding nearby, at a nearby location. Officers made contact with the individual, and a non-categorical use of force occurred involving body weight, physical force, and a distraction strike to the suspect's back. The officers realized that the individual was under the influence of an unknown substance and requested a rescue ambulance. He was transported to a nearby hospital for what we believe to be a narcotic ingestion. He was later that morning admitted to the hospital. And while we cannot confirm that his admission was directly related to the narcotic ingestion, we can't rule it out. But what we have done is treat it as a law enforcement injury pending that decision. So Force Investigation Division responded, obviously, as did the Office of Inspector General, and that investigation is continuing. And next matter I will move over to is our crime. We're midway through the summer, and despite the characteristics of these violence that I've talked about in other aspects of the country, and obviously the murder of Officer Diaz, in the city, we continue to have a reduction in overall violent crime. We have 2 fewer homicides this year versus last. We have 760 fewer violent crimes, which is just over a 4% reduction. We have 4,480 fewer property crimes, which is a 7.6% reduction, for a total overall Part 1 crime reduction of 6.8%, which represents 5,240 fewer victims this year versus last. Over a 2-year period, that's a 7% reduction. So these are good gains that I believe our strategies are working and continue to work in partnerships and problem solvings with the various communities of Los Angeles. We have seen, for instance, the area most pressing, as this commission's been informed repeatedly about the number of victims shot. That number was as high as in the low 70s as far as an increase overall year to date. That number stands at plus 31 year to date. So we have seen a slowing of that and gaining some ground. Gang crime continues to be the area of a challenge for us. We have 130 additional gang crimes this year versus last. 9 of those additional gang crimes are victims or shot, gang-related crimes. Regarding officer-involved shootings, officer-involved shootings today stand at 15 versus 23 last year, which is a 35% reduction. We have 6 fatal officer-involved shootings this year versus last year. That number was 9, which is a 33% reduction. Regarding traffic collisions, overall we have 577 fewer traffic collisions this year in the city of Los Angeles versus last. In regards to fatal injuries and serious bodily injuries, there's 7 fewer of those. Motor vehicles versus PED continues to be our challenge. We've had 3 additional either serious injuries or fatal collisions this year, motor vehicles versus pedestrians. We do continue to see a slight reduction in our bicyclist-involved collisions involving serious injuries or deaths, with 4 fewer. But I am pleased to see that in our bicyclist-involved collisions that we're down nearly 11%, with more than 100 fewer bicyclist-involved collisions this year versus last. And when we look at 2015, that number is 26% fewer bicyclist-involved collisions. So I think strategies there, including education within the bicycling community and our motor vehicle communities, is helping us, as well as engineering changes with bike lanes and so forth in this area that we saw some real challenges with earlier. In regards to our personnel strength, our sworn personnel staffing is at 9,988. I'm happy to report that on yesterday we began our latest class with 49 new recruits, of which 12% were African American and 35% were women. So while the number of women as a proportion of the class has improved, Chief Grimala is, with her new appointment within the Office of Support Services, is working to acquaint herself with the strategies within PTB on our outreach and engagement. And I've received a recent report this week that I'll be forwarding to the Board of Police Commissioners Subcommittee on Recruitment that speaks directly to our recruitment efforts in the coming next 6 months with the African American community, as well as with women and Asian Pacific Islanders. We have 388 reserve officers, 2,947 civilian personnel, and 1,484 cadets, and that concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any questions and hear public comment.
Questions of the Chief, Commissioner?
Yes, thank you, Chief. I'm glad to hear of some of the positive trends in terms of crime reductions, and share your concern about the increase in gang crime, and I'm interested in your thoughts on, I mean, not a whole elaborate presentation, but just your thoughts on some of the strategies you're using, particularly in terms of prevention, intervention, et cetera. But certainly if you have newer, improved enforcement strategies as well, but your efforts to prevent and address these crimes.
I would welcome an opportunity to invite Ms. Tremblay and our gang reduction efforts to come and make a presentation. GRID continues to work very closely with us, including this week announcing a new referral process that officers in the field can, when coming across a potential intervention or prevention effort using community-based organizations, can make a referral that can immediately go to the coordinator within the GRID office and the mayor's office. That's going to be then forwarded to the local provider with an accountability loop of what happens with that referral. That is, while it's not earth-shattering, it shows a continued evolution of us working in a prevention and intervention mode, not just solely an enforcement mode. Our Summer Night Lights program is in full swing. Our ambassador program with GRID resources, identifying local individuals for jobs programs that can work with gang interventionists to stem violence, interrupt and discourage and encourage instead more productive community safety. Those are ongoing. We are working on enforcement strategies in those areas that are we're seeing the greatest impact, to include our federal partners for the more organized and sophisticated gangs that are resulting in some of the street violence as well. So it's a multi-pronged strategy. I think it's more deserving of a presentation before the commission, and we'd be happy to provide one.
Other questions of the chief? We have public comments on the chief's report.
Yes, we have 10 public comment cards.
Okay.
Starting with Jonathan Foster, Isabel Cardenas, Annie Day. You mean in 2 minutes? No, just do your 2. Next speaker, please.
My name is Isabel Cardenas, and I am proud to be a Latina 81-year young activist. And I am most proud of being a co-initiator of Refuse Fascism, because the membership of our organization are just as I am. We all feel that the person who will intimidate us has not been born yet. And the reason why we are being targeted is because we demand on the streets, and by the way, peaceful marches that the Trump, Pence, white supremacist, fascist, and racist regime gets out of the White House. Why? We began our organization in the year that Trump was imposed on us by the college electoral vote. And why did we initiate our organization? Because we could tell in advance of the horrors that this man would bring into this country. The blood of the people, my Latina people of El Paso, lies on the hands of this white supremacist fascist regime that we have in the White House. Now, I hope that you do not interrupt me, because I was here 2 weeks ago and I demanded that I be told who gave the order to have a police informant infiltrate our organization and spy on us. Don't do that to me. I don't care. I am petite, but I am not to be intimidated.
Annie Day?
Where is the report that you received slandering our organization, accusing us
Next speaker, please.
Annie Day?
of carrying weapons in marches when we have never done that? You should check the police permit.
Chandler?
You can come back during public comment and
Kirschenberg?
take a full 2 more minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Where is the report?
You can come back during public
Where
comment.
was all that slander coming
Next
from?
speaker. It's okay.
Chandler?
I'll take care of it.
I've answered it, okay?
And
The report's
I
not
don't
been submitted yet.
expect the answer I got 2 weeks ago, which really astonished me.
He's not coming up here.
All of the accusations and slander that our organization has been.
We owe you those answers, and we will have that report. I do not have that report for you today. Thank you.
And I expect an apology, because we have never,
Look,
never.
just start the clock and let her finish her
or
public
carried
comment.
weapons in our marches. We have always had
Annie Day?
peaceful marches.
No, okay.
Chief Moore, you may not know that you were echoing in your distortions, lies, and slanders last week. You were echoing the lunatic conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, who makes the same kind of ridiculous and factless accusations against Refuse Fascism. You are either both not just justifying unconstitutional police spying, but going on what is a common COINTELPRO type distortion of a political and constitutionally protected constitutionally protected activities, organizing activities. You are either aiming to distort those, and or intimated that the spying operation was much bigger than what has been revealed thus far in the police reports we've been given. Originally, what the police reports say, and the commission should know this, that the police reports say is that a spy was inserted into Refuse Fascism in October 2018. The slander and outrageous comments, 2017, the slander and outrageous comments from Moore last week intimated that there had actually been a much larger spying operation against Refuse Fascism. These type of comments, A, justify illegal and unconstitutional police spying, B, do tremendous danger and harm when you're lying about and attempting to paint with a violence bait what is clearly and known to be an organization that is called for nonviolent mass resistance. Meanwhile, what also came out in the LA Times was there's no white supremacists, no fascist movements that are facing the same kind of treatment. What does it tell you about the legitimization of a fascist regime and fascist movements when you are giving backing to the police forces to spy, to harass, to infiltrate political organizations? So we actually do have a question. I don't want to sit here and get nothing.
Come back during public comment and answer your question. No, you're going to come back during the public comment. Next speaker, please.
Hirschberger? Michelle Show.
Next speaker.
Dementia. Soboroff has dementia.
Building trust. Yeah, I trust you to continue to serve and protect this fascist system by doing things like infiltrating nonviolent protest groups like Refuse Fascism. I am a defendant in these freeway cases. And I want to know who in this commission signed off on the confidential informant and why the LAPD is spying on nonviolent political protesters when there are open white supremacists shooting down people in the streets and they are backed by the president. And I've seen LAPD protect these white supremacists during anti-Trump rallies. I see them protect them, walking them, and not doing shit about their threats and their violence. As a result of the investigation from this anti-terrorist division and the major crimes unit, I'm facing criminal charges. I am facing criminal charges. The spying was unconstitutional, and now I'm facing these oppressive criminal charges from the city attorney, and I demand these charges get dropped. And I want to know who okayed the confidential informant, who in this police commission, okayed, and I need to see that report.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Michelle Show.
Okay, so I want to say that actually, as a result of your pig snitch infiltrator that was sent into our organization, I was charged with conspiracy charges, which were later dropped, okay? And my comrades that are still facing charges are facing 3 years in jail for protesting nonviolently. And all your pig murdering police that get away with murdering black and brown people day after day, and they see no time in jail, but protesting the Trump-Pence regime that is literally fomenting white supremacists to go and carry out these murder against immigrant people like places in El Paso, okay? And the LAPD, you know, has a long history of spying on political organizations that actually lead to murdering the leaders of these organizations. So all this talk about connecting with the community is a bunch of crap, okay? All of this protecting and serving is a bunch of crap. When you infiltrate an organization that is not doing nothing wrong, that is actually exercising the First Amendment right, and talking about going to college campuses and talking to students about a fascist regime, that you feel the need to send in a pig to sit in these meetings and spy and illegally record conversations that are protected political speech. And you sit here and not even want to give us this report about who sent in this spy, and you know, but you have all the resources and all the time in the world to sending these snitches to go into our organization and sit in, okay? And look, we're here to demand that all of these charges against all of these protesters get dropped. And demand that you stop murdering and getting away with murdering black and brown people on a daily basis.
Paola Miner, Jamie Garcia, and George Busetti.
Was the final three on this?
No, sir, we have 2 additional more.
Chief Moore, the family of Grishario Mack, the community and BLM-LA again demand that you fire Officers Ryan Lee and Martin Robles for their close range, fatal shots into Grishario Mack when he was murdered by LAPD in April 2018 at the Baldwin Hills Mall. As you know, this commission, in a very rare instance, found those shots out of policy. LAPD just recently released the video. The video was edited. The family has seen the video. It shows that Mr. Mack was subdued. He was laying in a fatal position, and these 2 officers walked over to him and fatally shot him. Our independent autopsy also shows that their firing was within inches of his body. Therefore, that this shooting was intentional. This killing follows a law enforcement pattern showing that Black lives do not matter, as they kill Black people, feeling that they will not be held accountable. We have seen repeatedly LAPD and other law enforcement apprehend numerous white or non-Black people who are suspected or guilty of far more serious crimes than Mr. Mack. We've seen these people be arrested without being murdered. LAPD's, you say, arrest and prosecution, that's not the role for Black people. The role is shoot to kill, then write a false report to justify. So we will continue to talk about the oppression, the disrespect, and the disproportionate number of murders of Black lives, and we're going to continue to lift up the name of Grishario Mack and others murdered by LAPD. And we question when you talk about community support. We know you were in the Valley talking to ministers. They let us know we are connected.
Next speaker, please.
And we know what you said.
Jamie Garcia. George Bussetti.
So it often seems like there's a lot of amnesia that goes on in this room in thinking about, the eloquent words that you attempted to have, Chief Moore, about these murders that have happened, and kind of forgetting your own history of upholding white supremacy and how white supremacists actually feel, kind of enhanced by the way law enforcement engages with communities. But I don't want to even waste my time with that, because I think the job of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition is constantly to expose. So whether we expose how you infiltrate and how the president, who wasn't even aware of IGG and wasn't aware that he's the one who signs off on this stuff, is laughable. But that's the continual work that we do, is to constantly expose the failures of this commission and of LAPD. But as far as housekeeping goes, again, I'm here to talk about our public records request 183148, which is primarily around the laser zones and the anchor points. And we do this because there was no investigation, no research into impact. So we are doing that work ourselves to show what has happened and to expose it further to the community. So I find it, it's unfortunate that you haven't responded since July 1st. So we're past our 10 days. But it's what's interesting is that, we're getting the map dumps, which are helpful because we're seeing a lot of things as well. But I see that you're really avoiding the things that should be easy. The things that should be easy to, kind of give over, like that are policies, protocols, procedures. We just want to know, how do you create the anchor points? How do you make the laser zones? That should not be difficult to turn over, and there should be no delay in that. We want the raw data of all this stuff that you've created. We want the emails. We even sent you different words that said, okay, search through those thousands, use these words. So there really should be no reason why there's a delay.
Next speaker, please. Who's next?
So who should I be talking to? Because talking to you last week didn't do anything.
Next speaker, please.
Mr. Bussetti.
2 weeks ago, and you can speak with, it was actually 2 weeks ago, and the sergeant right there.
2 weeks ago, but nothing still has happened.
Thank you.
Good for you, persistence. That's what you need with criminals, okay? Like all of you. Mr. Telfink, you remember the letter you sent to me with the transcript? Dude, you signed your warrant to federal prison. The transcript doesn't match the video.
What's this have to do with the chief's report?
Because it's chief, okay? Is this a letter from the chief of police? Uh-huh, chief, okay? Now, let's have some fun and read the Chief Paddock letter from you, him, and Internal Affairs, May 16, 2018. Of course, it's 2 years late with the number. Dear Mr. Bizzetti, an investigation into your complaint that was reported on November 7, 2016 regarding the conduct of employees of the LAPD has been completed. The investigation has gone through several levels of review, including myself and the command and staff of Internal Affairs Group. Your allegations that the department failed to implement the Internal Affairs Cooperative Agreement, 2003 DOJ Agreement on Internal Affairs, 30,400 killed as a result of it not being implemented. Your allegations the department failed to implement the Internal Affairs Cooperative Agreement that employees failed to take your complaint against the LA School Police Department and LA Unified School District employees that members of the LA Police Board of Commissioners erased police commission meeting audio recordings from LA's Los Angeles City View website, and that unknown employees denied your right to make telephone calls while in police custody have been classified as non-disciplinary, no misconduct. They said they can commit any crime on me they want, do whatever they want, commit felonies whenever they want.
Next speaker, please. Next speaker. Mr. Bezzetti, next speaker.
Audrey George.
That's why you have fear.
Mr. Khan.
If you interrupt the meeting, if you interrupt the meeting again, I'm going to ask you to leave.
I'm waiting until I finish with public comment.
You can leave.
I didn't interrupt.
I want him to leave.
You can't do that by law.
Yeah. Okay, who was the next speaker?
Audrey George and Mr. Khan.
And the last one?
Yes. Yes, sir.
You can't perform an illegal operation.
Who was the next speaker?
Mr. Khan.
Go ahead. And Mr. Bezzetti, you need to leave.
I'll leave. You want to perform call of authority? Give me your card, dude. All right, I gave it to you today. Oh, you're that stupid guy, huh?
Mr. Bezzetti, leave.
I am, asshole. You're the criminal here, asshole. I read you the fucking letter, and you don't care. So I'm leaving. Go fuck yourself. We're the ones that protect the rights. Are you COINTELPRO, dude? I'm doing it, stupid guy. You stupid fucking people. Yeah. If you don't get what I just said, you are COINTELPRO, people.
Go ahead, Mr. Khan.
I think one of the previous speaker talked about the history of that, and I was just one of the things on the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition website is a timeline of LAPD surveillance. It's about a 12-page document. And I was reminded going back in the 20s when the LAPD, they paid an LAPD detective's sister-in-law to go and seduce a city council member, how they were sued by students for infiltrating Cal State Long Beach, how they infiltrated the Democratic National Convention, on and on and on and on. So there's a long history for that. So of course, like, you know, what is happening right now is nothing new. It's not a moment in time. It's a continuation of history. I just want to bring attention that you all may have received this over your email, but there's a hard copy of that as well. So we submitted to the LAPD an extensive public records request yesterday. For the anti-terrorism intelligence section, intelligence gathering guidelines. And we want to make sure that they're forthcoming in that. We want to make sure that, you know, they don't start going down the route, because we are in the middle of a second lawsuit right now. And we won the lawsuit last time on the suspicious activity reporting program. The same bullshit they gave us about exemptions and national security exemption and DIGS exemption. We won the lawsuit and got the information. Right now we are getting the chronic offender bulletins from them, and now the city wants to settle because they want to give us the information, so instead of going to trial on August 29th. So I think my colleague Jamie Garcia also was making a point earlier. So be forthcoming. Just send this information, because we want to know all the details. We want to know the operation manuals. We want to know the training manuals. We want to know how this information is being shared. We want to know who's in the intelligence files, which entities have been infiltrated, what educational institutions have been infiltrated, what nonprofits have been infiltrated, because LAPD itself back in the late 70s, 80s had infiltrated over 200 nonprofits, including the sitting mayor's office as well, having 2 million documents and 55,000 individuals.
Go to public comment, please.
And it's now, so please just respond to it in a timely manner and give us all the information.
Public comment?
We have no more cards.
Okay.
Oh, the public comment. I'm sorry, the public comment, Jonathan Foster. Gina Viola, Paola Minor.
No, you can't. Come up in public comment like everybody else does. I'm going to ask you to stop interrupting the meeting. You come up to public comment like everyone else does. Go ahead. Start the clock, please.
And if the federal government did what it was supposed to do,
Taping himself. Next speaker, please.
Gina Viola,
Not here.
Paola Minor. Jamie Garcia. George Buzetti.
Not here.
Jeremy Tramer. Kai Heisem.
Not here.
William Young. Jennifer Young. Mary Ann.
It feels really disingenuous to hear Soboroff talk about backpacks and his kind of stunned response to bulletproof backpacks, given it's been 20 years of this stuff, right? So how that's surprising. But I'm a teacher. I live in it every day. So there's that. Mass shootings. To listen to you talk about mass shootings is aggravating. These two things both intersect in that, you see, really what's happening here is you have white supremacist rhetoric, right, and action, and shootings behind that, all kinds of ways in which FBI has reported that that police departments are infiltrated with white supremacists. And then I look at how the Homeland Security is militarizing, and you all are bringing it all in as much as possible with militarized weapons. And we have militarized weapons in the public's hands, which creates this twisted arms race of violence. And so I don't, where do you not understand how complicit and even one of the architects this institution is?
We did have it before.
It's just your surprise. Your surprise is just, it's disingenuous and it's irritating, and that's just really what I wanted to come back and say.
Thank you. Is that it? Any other speakers?
Possibly one more.
Okay,
Just verifying.
We do actually have two questions.
go ahead.
I'm not familiar with the format of
Did you guys have, hold on for a second. Did you guys have cards in? I put a card in. And did you have a card in also, young lady?
No, she didn't.
Okay.
Can't you just
What-
take the place of somebody who didn't speak? It's the same thing.
Okay, it'll be quick. One, we've asked this question a number of times now and not gotten an answer. Are you guys saying that the police commission, according to the IGG rules, the police commission is supposed to approve of a spying operation? So we actually have a very concrete question. Who approved the police spying operation?
Mr. Tefank, you
Refuse
want to
Fascism?
respond to her?
Question number two.
You want to listen to the answer?
I do. I want to ask.
Okay,
I'm
so
asking two questions.
be quiet and let him talk. Go
I'm going
ahead.
to ask two
Mr.
questions.
Tefank?
It's her time to actually.
The second, I actually do want to hear that answer, but our second question is when
Okay,
this.
public comment, so you're not going to get, we're not going to be responding to you, so you can talk to
Okay,
Mr.
please
Tefank
answer,
after.
and then I'm going to ask a second question. Please, sir.
No, he's not going to now. City attorney recommended that he doesn't.
You can't answer.
So you can ask him after the meeting.
The second question is when is this report, alleged report of self-investigating of the LAPD going to be released?
Thank you very much. Next speaker,
It's a
please.
concrete question.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to speak with Lieutenant Brian Raffish right back there. He'll raise his hand, and he'll
Okay.
give you the answer.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
You can't just tell her that she has to stop talking. She has 50 seconds. She still has 40 seconds. You have to
Jerry? Jerry? I'm just going to say, oh, wait till she's.
This is actually a public matter.
Oh,
so
go
why don't I
ahead.
just
Come on
say-
back. Yeah, go ahead.
time back on the clock. She has 50
Sure, sure.
Okay, it's
Thank you.
actually a public.
Thanks for pointing that out.
It's actually a public matter, so why can't I use my time to hear his answer and hear his answer?
Ma'am,
It doesn't work
if you
that
would
way.
please stop the clock, I'll explain this to you. You're under public comment. We cannot respond to matters that are asked from the dais because they are not agendized for the general public to hear that question or to get that answer. That's why the commissioner said we can talk to you offline, but we cannot respond to a matter under public comment because it is not an agendized item. That is under the Brown Act of Rules of Public Meetings.
So are you
it's-
guys going to put the police spying on your agenda, or is this?
Okay, so
Are you not
let's
disturbed
turn the
by
clock,
this?
let her talk and we'll be done with it.
At some point in time, the report that is going to come back from the chief of police will come to a public agenda when that report is received.
You all should, I mean, whatever the
You start
pro
the clock,
forma of this thing, but you actually you should be furious at the unconstitutionality of it and at the slander from the police chief 2 weeks ago about a nonviolent, constitutionally protected organization.
He was so quick to say that open to the public.
Next speaker, please. Oh, we have the last speaker.
Our last
Go ahead.
speaker is Ms. Jerry.
Can't talk about these matters in
Go ahead.
to slander the organization in public.
Okay, my name is Jerry Dietrich, and I'm with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. What I have to say today is of grave concern to all activists. We demand all charges be dropped against the Freeway 9 and UCLA 5. They are being prosecuted for sounding the alarm about the extreme danger of the Trump-Pence fascist regime. City Attorney Foyer filed charges against 11 people with a total of 57 misdemeanors in 2018. These charges are aimed at criminalizing political protest that steps outside the confines of the normal political channels, when in fact this is the only kind of protest that can prevent the consolidation of fascist America. Refuse Fascism has been calling for a movement of millions in the streets and sustained, nonviolent, determined protests aimed at driving the Trump-Pence regime from power. As you may know, 2 defendants from the Freeway 9 were tried in June. The trial ended in a hung jury. The vote was 9 for acquittal. The judge declared a mistrial, and the prosecutor usually has up to 1 year to refile the charges so that there can be another trial. Not in this case. The judge declared a mistrial and set an immediate date for retrial this month. Now remember, these are misdemeanors we're talking about. And we have wasted so much taxpayers' money on charging these people and trying them. I feel these people are being persecuted because they're on the right side of the issue. The fascist Trump-Pence regime must go by any means necessary.
We have a motion for adjournment. Second, all in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.
job.